Hello and welcome to the very second learning about the history of Japan reaction stream. I guess, yeah, it is a reaction stream. Last time we learned about quite a few of the early history of Japan, the Paleolithic, the Jomon, Yayoi, Kofun, and Asuka periods which were pretty interesting, but obviously, it was still early Japan. The amount of history to cover was, good, but it wasn't like as much as what we're getting at now. And yeah, today we are doing the Nara and Heian period, which, right away this stream is going to be like 4 hours and only cover 2 periods. Today we are going to focus exclusively on the video by the channel Byuden Japanese History. We watched a lot of their videos last time. They were great, so I figured we would continue. Link for their playlist with all the videos in the description, and obviously thank you to them for making those videos. As I said before, we'll keep up with our videos until the Sengoku Jidai. Then I'll switch to more varied videos, and some that are like even longer and go in depth for like later period. But yeah, again, really enjoyed what we watched last time. Learned a lot from like the early myths of the birth of Japan with Izanami and Izanagi, which that was all pretty messed up, I'm still not over it. That was all really messed up. The early Paleolithic period where, some of the different human and kind of human being getting from like the main continent to Japan. Eventually the Jomon period, really like the early time, the burial mound, some of the first rulers like Queen Himiko, was it? The shaman queen, which I thought was pretty interesting. I thought that was good stuff. The early clans, the rise of like the early settlement, the early clans, the early rulers, etc. Then eventually into like some of the other period, like top of my head, Yayoi, Kofun, and Asuka, where slowly Japan becomes more and more advanced. In Kofun and Asuka especially, they start having like a lot of like embassy going to China and coming back with a lot of knowledge on how the cities are built, the government is run, the city is run. We start basically around the time where there had been a few like fights about who's gonna rule the country, an assassination, but for the most part things aren't too bad yet, I would say. There hasn't been any major conflict, but yeah, next we're getting into the Nara period, and I'm guessing things are gonna really start to go crazy from here on out. Once again, the point of this series right now is to go through every period up to, I guess, Imperial Japan before World War II. And we're doing like, again, videos that are, I would say, very broad recap, summary of the period. But eventually, once we've done that and, catched up to Imperial Japan, then I'll be free to basically do streams where we go back to many different periods and cover a lot of different subjects. I've already built a little playlist on the side with some videos, something about the Genpei War, which I think the Genpei War happens at the... Where is it again? I have a list right here that helps me a little bit. The Genpei War happens at the end of the Heian period. It's actually also by Byuden, so like maybe we'll watch their Genpei War video next time. It will depend on like how much it is covered in the Heian video that they have. Since they made a side video, maybe it will be worth watching, so maybe next time we'll actually watch that one before getting into the Kamakura period. We might do that. And then we'll continue with that, and in the side playlist, as you can see, I've got a lot of varied video, some more from Byuden, covering stuff like Ancient War in Japan, the Genpei War, the former 9 and later 3 years war, history of sushi. Then I found videos about like the Kingdom of Okinawa, Buddhism in Japan, videos about the ninjas, and then I've found like a series of video about like every clan of the maybe Sengoku Jidai of Japan. This playlist is again like a lot of variety right now, and this is a lot of the stuff that we're going to be doing once we catch up to the heavy period part, But yeah, this isn't for yet, you know what I mean? Not for yet. But yeah, what do I know of like the Nara and Heian period? I probably know something, but top of my head I cannot tell you. Sorry. Like, I don't really, I know a lot of like random Japanese history, but without really knowing from what period it is. So it's possible I know stuff, but we're gonna have to find out, you know. So yeah, once again, link to the playlist with all the videos from Biyuden, the link to my Discord if you wanted to follow me, my stream amount and Patreon where you can support me, request reaction. I've also got a membership where you can support me monthly, get a couple emotes to use in the chat, and also request reaction videos every month. And if you have any suggestion for like any YouTube channel or any videos that you'd like me to watch about Japan, it can be any type of history, I mean, you know, anything really, or from like travel to true crime to actual history to warfare, you can tell me, and maybe eventually I'll watch it and I'll probably add it to my playlist. That's really the gist of it. As you can tell, I'm really excited about this series. I mean, again, I don't think this is gonna get a ton of viewers, same with like my Japan Prefecture series, right? But I don't know. I'm actually having a lot of fun learning about so much stuff that I feel like will really help me enjoy anime, visual novel, manga, and Japanese music even more, right? And movies as well. I mean, I've always had like some knowledge, but you know, there would always be so much reference and things that I would not get. And I'm hoping that, you know, with this long running series of like Japanese story stream, I'm gonna be able to fill up a lot of my gaps in knowledge and, you know, have a lot less moments of not knowing something, you know. Anyway, I should link the playlist with the Prefecture stream. If you haven't seen, we've done Hyogo, Kagawa, Hokkaido, Chiba, and Miyazaki so far. By the way, this isn't in order for some reason. Hokkaido was first and Kagawa, then Hyogo, then Chiba, and then Miyazaki. Yep, this is the right order. So here's the playlist. Japan Prefecture streams. By the way, I forgot to mention, if the chat looks weird right here, it's because I've got some bug and I don't have time to fix it right now, so I'll fix it later, yeah. Anyway, let's get into it. Let's start with the Nara period. Biyuden Japanese History, the Nara period part 1, Japanese History, the textbook. And I should not put on some Japanese subtitles for you guys. You said last time you liked it, so I will put them on. Auto-translate. Japanese doku, right here. Here we go. I found it. Oh, konbanwa. Hello, hello. Oh, Miyazaki. It was a short stream, not very long.
After 5.5 decades, the visionary ideas of the Taika reforms are at last made a reality. But right from the jump, cracks in the foundations are beginning to show. Join me today as we visit a new capital, meet new rulers, and witness the rise of new puppet masters pulling the strings behind it all on this 6th episode of Japanese History, the textbook, on the Biyuden Japanese History channel.
Let's learn. Again, like top of my head, I don't really know if I know anything about the Nara period. I can't really think of one thing. I might know a ruler or maybe a war.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Japanese History, the textbook, the video series where we make our way chronologically through Japanese history, using Japanese language educational materials as our guide. I have two very little announcements before we begin today. Number one is that I've added yet another book to our stable of sources, this one being called Nihonshi Naze to Nagare ga Wakaru Hon. This book is aimed at Japanese high school students studying for college exams, and its cover proclaims that it's comprehensive enough to get you through the Japanese Center exam and into universities up to and including those of well-known status. However, it stops short of elite schools such as Tokyo and Kyoto University. So for all those viewers out there hoping my videos will get them into Todai, I'm afraid you may need to do some additional research. Anyway, this book has a strong focus on chronologically explaining the events and specific important people popping up throughout Japanese history, which is a bit in contrast to my other sources, which tend to focus more on larger themes and broader socio-historical developments. So that's why I've brought it on board. My second announcement is just a small correction to something I said in my very first video, which has been bugging me for weeks now. In that video, I translated the name for ancient Japanese dwellings, Tateana Jugyo, into English as post-in-ground pit dwellings. But I should have just said pit dwellings or pit houses. They did have posts inside them supporting their roofs, but these really have nothing to do with their basic definition or with the meaning conveyed by the original Japanese word. I doubt this is really bothering anyone other than me, but I just wanted to get that correction out there. Alright, cool. I think I've talked quite enough for this intro. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. Japanese History, the Textbook, Episode 6, The Nara Period, Part 1.
Nara.
At the end of our last video, Prince Owama, younger brother of the architect of the Taika reforms, the late Emperor Tenji, defeated his own nephew, Tenji's son, in the Jinshin War to become...
I tried to look for a video about the Jinshin War, but I did not find any in English. Maybe there's not too much details about the Jinshin War, yeah. I was kind of interested, especially with this Battle of the Bridge, but, you know, all I could find was Wikipedia, yeah.
From the new leader of Japan, Owama ascended to the throne in Asuka.
Sato is a common surname in Japan. Kato, Saito, and other surname ending in To, often descendants of the Fujiwara clan. Interesting.
Where he took on the name Emperor Tenmu and became the first ruler in Japanese history to adopt the title of Tenno, Emperor of Japan. After Tenmu's death in 686, his widow took his place on the imperial throne as Empress Jito, and she set about carrying on her late husband's legacy, governing along the same trajectory that he had, and completing projects which he had begun, such as the move to the new capital at Fujiwara-kyo. She enacted her own new law code, the Asuka Kiyomihara-ryo, named after the imperial palace used prior to the move to Fujiwara-kyo. And she also conducted the Koin Ninjaku census. Following this, the conducting of censuses would become a regular thing, with a census being carried out once every 6 years, and each census being made obsolete 30 years after its creation. The only exception to this last rule would be the Koin Ninjaku itself, which would remain permanently as a sort of master list. Social class was a very important element of society at the time, and the Koin Ninjaku would exist as a means to confirm any person's lineage and the original social class of their ancestors. Ironically,
it must have taken forever to do a census. I mean, you have to go all across Japan and, you know, try to find all the small village and all the town. I'm sure there was like a good amount of like government employees doing it, but yeah, that's something.
This permanent master list has not survived to the present day. In 694, construction was completed on Fujiwara-kyo, and the imperial palace was officially moved there from Asuka. The goal in the creation of this new capital was to have a permanent place for emperors and empresses to conduct the affairs of government, without having to relocate every time a new person ascended to the throne. This may sound like the obvious choice, but this had not been the norm up until this point. Important bureaucratic offices and aristocratic residences were also placed in Fujiwara-kyo, and 3 emperors would ultimately reign from this capital: Empress Jito, her grandson Emperor Monmu, and Monmu's mother, Empress Genmei.
So it didn't actually last long. I mean, maybe they had long reigns, but yeah. It is a thing with Japan to move the capital a lot. I don't know if, like, in other countries it is as common to always move the capital like this. It really doesn't seem like the most optimal way to do things, because it's a lot of work, I assume, to relocate the capital every time, yeah? Manga, Japanese history, elementary school. Manga character than historical figure. I understand.
Who would move the capital again, this time to Heijō-kyo, aka Nara, partway through her reign. We are getting slightly ahead of ourselves, though. This is the era when direct male line imperial succession was becoming the norm, and it is thought that Empress Jito may have ascended to the throne as a placeholder until her grandson, the later Monmu, was of age to rule. In later eras, we frequently see child emperors ascending to the chrysanthemum throne as figurehead rulers, but this was still very much an age when the sovereign was expected to be something of a competent adult, regardless of whether or not they were the one making the final political decisions. Monmu became emperor in 697 at the age of 14, adult enough for the time, I suppose. Although
I guess. I mean, I say it all the time, but in history it is crazy to me that there's so many leaders that were like 14, 15, 16, and a lot of the time they don't really do that well. but there's some exception, like Alexander the Great, Gustav Adolphus, I think, of Sweden. There's some that, like, even though they're only 14, 15, they do pretty great. But I can't imagine, I mean, it's so young. How do you know anything about, like, leading the country?
Tired Empress Jito continued to help him govern until her death a few years later. Speaking of Empress Jito's death, she was actually the first emperor of Japan to be cremated after passing away.
Oh.
Easily the most important development of the young Emperor Monmu's reign was the establishment in 701 of the Taiho Ritsuryo Code, Japan's first of such to be created. The concept of a Ritsuryo Code was, like so many other things, an idea borrowed from the Chinese, in this case the Tang dynasty. The Ritsu part refers to criminal law, punishments essentially, and the Ryo part refers to administrative law, the rules, systems, and structures of government, in other words. The crux of this Ritsuryo concept was that these criminal and administrative laws would be written down and compiled in an organized way, allowing for a powerful, structured central government with the emperor at its head. With the Ritsuryo system in place, the emperor could feel confident that his orders were being transmitted to the right places and being carried out accordingly. Prior to 701's Taiho Ritsuryo Code, Emperor Tenji's Omi-ryo and Empress Jito's Asuka Kiyomihara-ryo had both been enacted, but these were both ryo-only law codes. The Taiho Ritsuryo Code was Japan's first complete, full-fledged adoption of the Ritsuryo concept, incorporating both the criminal and administrative aspects of the system. The actual creation of this code was not carried out by Emperor Monmu himself, of course, but rather by two high-status political figures working under him, Fujiwara no Fuhito and Prince Osakabe. Fujiwara no Fuhito was the son of our old pal Nakatomi no Kamatari, the man who helped engineer the downfall of the Sōga and plan the Taika reforms with Prince Nakano-Oe, aka Emperor Tenji. And Prince Osakabe was the son of Emperor Tenmu. Now, you might be wondering, if Emperor Tenmu's son is alive and well, why is he not emperor instead of this teenage kid, Monmu? Well, up until relatively modern times, polygamy was practiced in Japan amongst people of high birth as a way of ensuring that children, particularly a son, would be born to carry on the family line. A nobleman would typically have multiple side wives called sokushitsu and a single main wife, his seishitsu. These words, by the way, are often translated into English as concubine and wife, respectively, but I personally find the terms sidewife and main wife to get the point across a bit more clearly and without the prostitute-invoking connotations of the word concubine. I will leave it up to you to choose the term you prefer.
I don't know. I guess I've watched enough the apothecary deities, with Mao Mao and, the concubines and the real palace and all that. I kind of understand the point. I mean, I do feel like, I don't know if like the Japanese system was the same, but yeah, side wife doesn't really, I think it's not really the same as concubine, yeah? I don't know. I mean, it's a complicated thing. I can't imagine.
In the case of the emperor, he had a variety of different hierarchical categories of side wife, but he also had only one main wife, the empress consort or kogo, and any sons born to her would be prioritized over all others. In the case of Emperor Tenmu, his main wife, the later Empress Jito, did indeed bear him a son, who became his crown prince. This prince would die in his 20s without ever managing to claim his birthright to the throne, but he did father a son during his lifetime, and
the imperial family has also adopted monogamy, so now they are facing difficulties due to a lack of successor. Yeah, I did see the news about that. That the line of the imperial family might end. I don't know if that's like I mean, is it a good thing or bad thing? Because it's a bit too late to reintroduce monogamy to save the line. I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know.
That son was Emperor Monmu. In this way, Monmu, being the grandson of the main line, had priority over the sons of the various sidelines, such as the one that produced Prince Osakabe. Anyway, keep this seishitsu sokushitsu marriage system in the back of your mind from now on, as it'll be a constant thing we encounter throughout Japanese history, both with the aristocracy and with the samurai. Anyway, backtracking slightly to the Taiho Ritsuryo Code. We know that this code was made up of laws relating both to crime and punishment and to the administration of the country.
Yeah.
But what was the actual content of these laws? Well, to put it simply, the Taiho Ritsuryo Code was the law code which actually implemented the ideas of the Taika reforms, the ideas outlined in the Imperial Reform Decree issued in 645. The government, under the emperor, was fundamentally structured into a system of 2 high offices and 8 ministries, with the various Gozoku lords and imperial relatives incorporated into said system as bureaucrats, receiving ranks from the emperor and being hereafter referred to as Kizoku, aristocrats.
Oh yeah.
The 2 high offices, by the way, were the Jingikan, the Department of Divinities, and the Daijokan, the Great Council of State, with the former overseeing religious events and ceremonies, and the latter being in charge of governing under the leadership of the Minister of the Right, Udaijin, the Minister of the Left, Sadaijin, and the Chancellor of the Realm, the Daijo Daijin. Japan.
Well, I always heard about like the Minister of the Right and the Left. I didn't know there was like Daijo Daijin, like a Minister of the Middle, the Chancellor of the Realm. I see.
Japan itself was divided into one central region, the Kinki or Kinai region, which we have discussed before, and 7 outer regions, each composed of multiple.
The first in line to succeed to the throne is Princess Aiko. Second is the son of the emperor, younger brother, so and so. Okay.
Provinces. These outer regions, moving southwest to northeast, were the Saikaido, the Nankaido, the Sanyōdo, the Sangindo, the Tokaido, the Hokurikudo, and the Tosando. The provinces within these regions would each be led by a provincial governor called a kokshi, who would be dispatched from among the central aristocracy, and he would in turn have district managers called gunji serving under him, who were typically drawn from the wealthy layer of the local population. Highways were also built connecting the various provincial capitals to the central region, and post stations were constructed along these roads at approximately 16-kilometer intervals, with horses called ekiba that could be swapped out from station to station to enable continuous riding. All free denizens of the realm, from aristocrats down to ordinary farmers, were called ryomin, literally good people if you directly translate the kanji characters. But there was another class of people established beneath the ryomin who were called senmin. 5 varieties of senmin existed, but they were essentially a slave-like class of people, and the members of their lowest ranks were bought and sold like livestock. While the senmin certainly lived a blighted existence, they were at the very least free from the burden of many of the taxes which all ryomin were obligated to pay. The tax system enforced...
I mean, yeah. I don't know if it's the biggest benefit. I know it didn't mean it like that, but it sounds like you said, it's good to be a slave, you don't have to pay tax. Yeah. I don't think he meant it like that, but it sounds kind of funny.
Upon the ryomin was the soyocho system, which we touched on during our discussion of the Taika reforms. As I mentioned then, all people in Japan above the age of 6 were given rice fields called kubunden under the Ritsuryo system of government, with males receiving about 2,300 square meters of land, females receiving 2/3 of this, and the individuals of the slave class receiving 1/3 of this portion.
Wait, so everybody gets a rice field even if this is not what they want to do? Like, what if they're like, I don't know, like a blacksmith? Do they still have to take care of the rice field? Or they can give it to someone else?
Free women and the slave class, however, only had to pay the government a certain amount of their rice crop, while free men had to pay not only a portion of the rice they grew, but also taxes in specialty local products, cloth, and manual labor performed for 60 days per year under the supervision of the provincial governor. They also were expected to transport the specialty products and cloth to the capital themselves. Finally, adult males were also subjected to a military draft for guard duty, either in Kyushu around the Dazaifu to guard against any possible attacks from the Asian mainland, or in the imperial capital. Once drafted for guard duty, one's term of service was 3 years, and while some of the soyocho taxes were exempted during this period, draftees were typically forced to foot their own bill for things such as their equipment and their travel expenses. Because of these various factors, there actually seems to have been a fair amount of census fraud among the peasant class.
I was gonna say that doesn't sound like a great system. I mean, I don't know.
With many men registering as women to avoid paying the heavy taxes and carrying out the extreme obligations imposed on them. It's also worth noting that despite technically being ryomin, most high-level aristocrats were exempted from the military service and various taxes which I just outlined, mostly just paying the rice tax. For
some things they will change, I guess, 1,000 years ago or now.
Or now at least. A waka poem remains from the early Nara period, written by a bureaucrat named Yamano from the perspective of a poor farmer in his province, which vividly illustrates the plight of the ryomin peasants in the early 700s. An excerpt from Donald Keene's translation of the poem reads, "Wide as they call the heaven and earth, for me they have shrunk quite small. Bright though they call the sun and moon, they never shine for me. Is it the same with all men, or for me alone? By rare chance I was born a man, and no meaner than my fellows, but wearing unwadded sleeveless clothes in tatters, like weeds waving in the sea, hanging from my shoulders, and under the sunken roof with the leaning walls, here I lie on straw spread on bare earth, with my parents at my pillow, my wife and children at my feet, all huddled in grief and tears. No fire sends up smoke at the cooking place, and in the cauldron a spider spins its web. The village headman comes with rod in hand to our sleeping place, growling for his dues. Must it be so hopeless, the way of this world?" One can only imagine.
That is pretty depressing, yeah. I mean, it really doesn't sound like, throughout most of the story, the peasant class is kind of exploited and often not doing very well, but yeah, the system really sounds like it's grinding people down. They have to farm the rice, bring it to the capital, all on their own dime. Then they have to do military service, but they also have to buy all of their own stuff. It's like, I understand some of the system are needed, but it does feel like it was probably very unbalanced and, really bringing down, bringing down the quality of life of the normal peasant, which I'm sure the aristocrat didn't care, right? But it's not a good thing, Even the peasant need to prosper a little bit. The only country where 7th century bourgeois literature has survived. That's cool.
That it must have been hard for the young Emperor Mommu in his palace in Fujiwara-kyo to wrap his mind around the plight of the peasant class, if he was aware of it at all. But
it's definitely one of the things that you often see people saying that, the only people who should be eligible to become prime minister or president of a country these days should be someone who has actually experienced what it's like to be at the bottom of society. I kind of agree with that, I can't lie.
But sadly for him, he was destined to experience the harshness of life in the ancient world in his own way. 6 years after the enactment of the Taiho Ritsuryo Code in the year 707, the 25-year-old emperor fell ill and died, and his mother was forced to succeed him as sovereign, being enthroned as Empress Gemme. Mommu did have a son at this time, but
I can still feel bad for someone like Mommu, right? I mean, he was 14 when he became emperor, so I'm sure for all the time he was a kid, they were preparing him to be emperor, so he never had a chance to be a normal kid. And then 10 years emperor and he dies. It's a bit sad.
The boy was only 6 years old, and as mentioned before, Japanese royals of this period were not eager to put small children on the throne. As a result, Empress Gemme, as well as the successor who followed her, would sit on the throne as stopgap rulers, holding down the fort until Mommu's son was of age to rule. The real power behind the throne at this time was the aforementioned Fujiwara no Fushito, whose daughter Miyako had been the late Emperor Mommu's sole wife and the mother to his young heir. Fushito was determined to see this child, his grandson, sit on the imperial throne one day. 708, the second year of Empress Gemme's reign, saw the creation of the Wado Kaichin, Japan's first standardized circulated currency, and the first in a series of 12 official coinages released throughout Japan's ancient period.
It looks pretty cool. I wonder why there's a square in the middle. I'm sure there's some significance, but yeah, I don't know.
The Wado Kaichin contained two varieties of coins, copper and silver, and is thought to have been produced following a large tribute offering of copper to the imperial court from the province of Musashi. In ancient times, just as in modern ones, the issuing of currency was the sole right of the person or persons in charge of a country, and by creating the Wado Kaichin, the imperial court could thus further assert its status as the ultimate authority in Japan.
Yeah.
Unfortunately for the court, however, this currency did not circulate particularly successfully. They had created it not with the needs of the people in mind, but rather with their own goals placed first and foremost, and the common people were quite happy to continue using rice and cloth as currency, just as they had been doing for ages. The government would actually go so far as to issue a law bestowing higher court ranks on individuals who accumulated large amounts of the Wado Kaichin coinage, a slightly confusing law considering that accumulation does not equal circulation, but it is likely that the court just wanted to get the coins out of their warehouses at this point. By the way, coins dating back to the late 600s were discovered in Asuka in 1998, casting some doubt on the Wado Kaichin's status as the first coin currency in Japanese history. But it is thought that these were likely just used for ritualistic purposes and did not circulate. Alright, so everything we have discussed up to this point has been something of a prologue to the Nara period, but it was all, technically speaking, still the tail end of the Asuka period. That's all about to change though, as in 710, Empress Genmei moved the capital from Fujiwara-kyo to a new city called Heijo-kyo, modern-day Nara. One possible reason for this move may have been Fujiwara no Fuhito's desire to get the seat of government away from meddling local power holders in the Asuka.
Again, I really feel like the amount of money and time that they waste constantly changing the place of the capital must be crazy. I mean, can you imagine? They have to build a new capital, they have to move everybody and everything every time. I mean, I'm sure the money could be spent on something more, you know? Yeah, why are you moving the capital so often? Like it's a vacation house. The 50 yen coin currently is in Japan as a round hole in it. Yeah, I know they like round hole is more normal. I've seen, there's a lot of currency in the world that has the round hole, but a square, I don't know if it's common, yeah. I wonder what it means though to have an hole in the middle of a coin. I don't really know.
Region. Like Fujiwara-kyo, the new capital of Heijo-kyo was built according to the Chinese grid style known as Tojo in Japanese. But in Heijo-kyo's case, its layout was directly modeled on the Tang capital of Chang'an. A large boulevard called the Suzaku-oji, or Suzaku Avenue, ran through the center of the city.
That's kind of nice, the stream in the middle like this. It must be interesting to live in a city so perfectly, parallel. Everything is very well built like this.
Dividing it into an eastern half called the Sakyo, or left capital, and a western half called the Ukyo, or right capital, with right and left being judged from the perspective of the imperial palace. Said palace, the Kyujo, was in the central northern part of the city, and it consisted of the emperor's living space, known as the Dairi, 2 compounds for conducting the affairs of state, known as Chodoin.
There's any other country in the world where the capital has moved so frequently? Yeah. I don't think so.
A building for ceremonies involving the participation of the emperor called the Daigokuden, and offices for the various administrative agencies of the government. At its southern end was a giant gate called the Suzakumon, a magnificent and imposing structure where foreign emissaries could be greeted. The palace complex was designed to be a self-contained unit within which all matters of government could be conducted. Heijo-kyo was also home to the residences of Japan's aristocrats and bureaucrats, and many important temples theretofore located in Asuka, such as Yakushiji, which we mentioned at the end of our last episode, were relocated to the new capital and rebuilt there. At its height, the city of Heijo-kyo was home to about 100,000 residents, roughly 2.2% of the entire population of Japan.
That is a lot. And I see right here, we can see the ancient mound, the keyhole mound right here, when we looked into the German period, I think. This is where it's from. I think.
Of these residents, some 7 to 10,000 were bureaucrats, but true blue-blooded aristocrats numbered only about 1 to 200. In 715, Empress Genmei retired from the throne, citing age as her reason. She was about 54 at the time, relatively old by ancient standards, and would indeed pass away only 6 years later. However, given that her grandson was still very young, she was instead succeeded by her daughter, the late Emperor Monmu's sister, who ascended to the throne as Empress Gensho. It was during the reigns of Genmei and her successor Gensho that Japan's two earliest surviving histories, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, were finally completed. The composition of the former,
yes, referenced the Nihon Shoki many times in the video so far, yeah.
The Kojiki, was begun in the late 600s by the order of Emperor Tenmu, but it was completed in 712 by a bureaucrat named Ono Yasumaro, who presented it to Empress Genmei. The Kojiki heavily focuses on the mythology behind Japan's imperial family, with about a third of it being prehistoric myth, describing, among many other things, how the gods Izanami and Izanagi created the Japanese archipelago, and how the grandson of the sun goddess Amaterasu eventually descended from heaven to rule it as the first emperor of Japan. The Kojiki was written in what was basically Japanese, though expressed only through Chinese kanji characters, and it seems to have been aimed at a domestic audience, with the goal of stressing the divine blood of the imperial family. The second history, our old friend the Nihon Shoki, was completed in 720 by the late Emperor Tenmu's son, Prince Toneri Shinno, with a foreign audience in mind, being written in what was essentially Chinese. The Nihon Shoki covers up until the reign of Empress Jito, and while it also contains Japan's
in Shinto belief, objects accumulate dirt and become undesirable over time, so they must be constantly renewed. That's why every time there was a plague or an earthquake, the entire capital city was rebuilt. Oh, that's one of the reasons then. Interesting. Okay. I did not know that.
Creation legend, only about a tenth of its total content is in the realm of mythology. That being said, a large amount of the quote-unquote history in the two documents is...
I was gonna say, like, I'm guessing it's not the most accurate, especially it was written, but, a lot of historians throughout history have a lot of bias and, you can't always fully trust what they wrote. But since the Nihon Shoki was written by the son of the emperor, at such a high position of government and at such a high position of needing to appear a certain way and influence things, you can assume that a lot of what he wrote was probably embellished or changed to what it really was. Yeah, it's easy to assume that.
Highly dubious, and a large part of modern Japanese history scholarship has involved comparing them with the results of scientific and archaeological research to determine which parts are actually telling us the truth. Interestingly, up until World War II, both books were considered to be the canon history of Japan by the Japanese government, and it was only after the war that the country's creation myth stopped being taught as history in public school classrooms. During the reign of Empress Genmei's successor, Empress Gensho, Fujiwara no Fushito continued to operate as the puppet master behind the throne, and in 718 he enacted Japan's second Ritsuryo law code, the Yoro Ritsuryo. Although the former code, the Taiho Ritsuryo, does not exist today, it seems that Fushito's Yoro Ritsuryo was nearly identical to its predecessor. His motivation for making the new code seems to have been that, while he participated in the creation of the previous code, the most central figure in its inception was the aforementioned Prince Okabe, and Fushito wanted a new code for which he could take primary credit. Fushito would pass away only 2 years later, and one can't help but wonder if his ambition here was driven by some sense that his life was nearing its close. Only about a third of the Ritsu portion of the Yoro Ritsuryo has survived until the present day, but nearly all of the Ryo portion is known to modern historians, in large part thanks to explanatory commentaries on it written during the Heian period. By the end of his life, Fujiwara no Fushito held and exercised power nearly at a dictatorial level, and so it is perhaps unsurprising that he had many detractors who were quite excited when he drew his final breath. After his death, those detractors rallied around one Prince Nagaya, Nagaya-o, a grandson of Emperor Tenmu through one of his lower-ranking wives, and Nagaya would step in to fill the power vacuum and become the new de facto leader of the government in Fujito's wake. Prince Nagaya focused his attention in particular on the problems plaguing the imperial court's finances, problems brought on by the extreme harshness of the new Ritsuryo tax system. I mentioned the male-to-female census fraud problem a little ways back, but even worse than fraud was the growing phenomenon of peasants outright discarding their kubunden rice fields and simply absconding. Many of these runaways became monks or vagrants, or entered into the personal service of wealthy aristocrats or large religious establishments, and their abandoned rice fields became uncultivated wasteland. Additionally, significant economic...
I mean, I'm not surprised. Again, it does seem like a very broken system to just automatically give rice field to literally everybody without really asking them, right? It's not surprising that a ton of people would not know how to do it, would not be motivated to do it, and that they would be abandoned like this. Yeah, it's really not the best system to just give it to everybody. I mean, on paper, like, you know, it sounds kind of good, right? So everybody gets a piece of land, but it's not that simple. Yeah.
Inequality had also begun to emerge among the peasant farming class, with unscrupulous individuals illegally buying up or confiscating other people's kubunden land and treating it as their own property, despite the fact that it technically belonged to the state. These factors, along with a fair amount of population growth throughout the country, meant that there was actually an insufficiency of kubunden fields. Prince Nagaya resolved that the ideal solution to the government's financial problems was not any sort of humanitarian policy change, but rather a simple increase in the number of rice fields being cultivated, as more land being farmed equals more land being taxed. In 722, he issued a new land development plan called the Hyakuman Chobu Kaikon Keikaku, and under this plan, provincial governors or district managers would provide peasants with food and set them to work opening up new land for cultivation for periods of 10 days at a time. Governors or managers who failed to do so effectively could face penalties as harsh as having their posts permanently revoked without any chance of reinstatement. However, even despite the central government's bullying demeanor, this campaign proved generally ineffective, as there was punishment for failure but no particular reward to anyone for success. Prince Nagaya thus decided to change to more of a good cop approach, and this time, in 723, the central government issued the Sanzei Shin no Ho.
I mean, if he's learning, that's a good thing, right? You know, doing it in such an harsh way isn't working, so I need to be more nice. You know, if he's learning that lesson, that's a good thing.
A law which would permit farmers to possess any land which they had personally developed for cultivation for 3 generations before returning it to the central government. Remember, prior to this, farmland was not an inheritable possession. It was the property of the emperor and the state, lent to the people who farmed it and then returned and redistributed when those people died. With the issuing of the Sanzei Shin no Ho, farmers found themselves with a new motivation to begin working towards the government's goals, as they suddenly had the chance to have some semblance of legal ownership over their own fields. Sadly for the central government, this very law would also be the first loose thread in the unraveling of Japan's new governmental system. The next year, Emperor Monmu's son at last ascended to the chrysanthemum throne at age 23 as Emperor Shomu, although his retiring aunt, Empress Gensho, would continue to participate in court affairs by aiding and advising the young man. Emperor Shomu,
I mean, he's way less young than the 14-year-old from before, you know. 23 is not that bad.
His mother was Fujiwara no Fushito's daughter Miyako, was the first ruler of Fujiwara blood to sit on the imperial throne, and his Fujiwara relatives had every intention of taking advantage of that convenient fact. Active in court politics at this time were the late Fushito's 4 sons, Fujiwara no Muchimaro, Fujiwara no Fusasaki, Fujiwara no Umakai, and Fujiwara no Maro, often just referred to as the 4 Fujiwara brothers. With their nephew's enthronement, supreme power was nearly within the brothers' reach, but they still had one very large obstacle standing in their way: Prince Nagaya. In 729, the brothers conspired to frame Nagaya for treason, and they forced him to commit suicide in an incident somewhat bluntly titled the Prince Nagaya Incident, or Nagaya-o no Hen. With the prince...
I think everything is called like that. In a lot of Japanese historical moments, it's the something something incident. Yeah, in the history it's often called incident.
Out of the way, the brothers then moved to have their younger sister, Komyoshi, married to Emperor Shomu, but not as one of his lesser wives. Komyoshi would become the young emperor's Kogo, his empress consort, his main #1 wife, if you will, a position heretofore reserved only for women of imperial blood. Prince Nagaya certainly would have opposed such a marriage had he been alive, and this was likely a large motivator for his elimination. With their rival dead and their sister made empress consort of Japan, the Fujiwara brothers were on top of the political...
I'm surprised there was no one else to oppose it, since it was like a classic old school kind of viewer things, yeah. Shibuya incident.
Political world, but their golden age would not last long. 8 years after the Prince Nagaya incident, a smallpox plague ravaged the Japanese archipelago, and all 4 brothers perished from the disease in the same year. It is said that many people at the time considered the brothers' untimely demise to be the work of Prince Nagaya's angry spirit, but I will leave it to you to reach your own final conclusions on that one.
I wonder what kind of plague it was.
And with that bit of ghostly hearsay, we have reached the end of our first episode on the people and events.
Yeah. In history video, they often don't really mention they say a plague came upon. I don't know if it's because we don't know what kind of plague it was. Because plague can be a lot of different things, right? Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, well. It's really the... how would you call it? The randomness of life, right? I mean, they did all this scheming, the 4 brothers. They managed to kill the guy they wanted to kill, not get away with it, get their sister to be the main wife, and then there's a plague and they all die, so they can't really profit from like all the scheming that they did. It's definitely the... it's almost karma, yeah. It feels almost like karma. Yeah. Though obviously, that's not really what it is, because a lot of other people died that had nothing to do with any of this, so it is but a plague, but very interesting. Yeah. The one before the one. So, good video, and yeah, let's watch part 2 of the Nara period. I'll put subtitles on again. Oh, it's on, I think.
In the great...
Yep, we are. I'll go straight to the start.
On our last episode, we saw the rise to power of Fujiwara no Fushito, the son of the Asuka period politician Nakatomi no Kamatari, and a key player in the creation of Japan's first 2 Ritsuryo law codes.
Oh, just the guys.
Fushito was the man pulling the strings.
I understand. I have not... I've only watched a little bit of Jujutsu Kaisen, so I don't really know too much about it.
Behind the throne during the early Nara period, after the move to the new capital of Heijōkyō, colloquially known as Nara. But after his death, the top spot was once again up for grabs. The power vacuum was initially filled by the royal family member Prince Nagaya, who attempted to encourage new land development out in the provinces by temporarily permitting private ownership of land, a move that achieved its goal but simultaneously undermined the central government's fundamental philosophy that all land in the country was the property of the state. Prince Nagaya was eventually overthrown by the late Fushito's 4 sons, known collectively as the Fujiwara Yonkyōdai, or the 4 Fujiwara brothers, who maneuvered to get their non-royal sister Komyoshi installed as the empress consort of the reigning Tenno, Emperor Shomu. The Fujiwara brothers seemed poised to begin a glorious age of political dominance, but less than 10 years after their coup d'etat, all 4 of them were wiped out by a smallpox plague which was sweeping through Japan at the time. The Fujiwara clan were influential, but they had not yet established a total stranglehold on Japan's political world, and much like what had happened with the death of Fujiwara no Fushito and the rise of Prince Nagaya, the untimely deaths of the 4 brothers saw a new anti-Fujiwara political force emerge in their wake. Stepping to the forefront on this occasion was a man named Tachibana no Moroe, a branch member of the imperial family and the older half-brother of the new empress consort Komyoshi, with whom he shared the same mother. Notably, he did not share the same father with the empress consort, making him completely unrelated to the Fujiwara and thus quite uninterested in helping them at all with their political goals. Rather, Moroe employed two men who had recently
It's not going to bring conflict, not at all.
returned to Japan from Tang, China, where they had spent close to 2 decades studying the government, culture, and religion there. These men were the monk Gembo and the learned aristocrat Kibi no Makibi, the latter of whom was so
Kibi no
renowned for his
Makibi.
intellect that later generations came to view him as almost akin to a wizard, and Heian period illustrations depict him performing such miraculous feats
Whoa.
as flying in the sky and manipulating demons. With the help of these two men, Tachibana no Moroe hoped to steer Japan's new Ritsuryo system in a direction closer to that of the original blueprint laid in Tang, China, with particular emphasis placed on hamstringing the Fujiwara clan so that the emperor could take his rightful place as the supreme and absolute leader of government. Let's step back for a moment and talk about Japan's relationship with Tang China during this period. You will recall that, during the time of Prince Shotoku way back in the early 600s, Japan had sent several embassies called Kenzuishi to China's
And they
Sui
went
dynasty,
pretty well, I think.
both to establish diplomatic relations and to learn from the
Okay, I know.
example of the culturally sophisticated
Okay.
Chinese. When the short-lived Sui dynasty fell in 618 and the Tang dynasty arose in its place, Japan continued to send scholarly embassies, now called kentoshi, throughout the mid-7th century. However, with Japan's military clash against the Tang-Silla
Baekgang.
alliance at the Battle of Baekgang, aka Haksonko, in 660,
Whoa. What is this? I've never seen a ship like this. Okay, you know what? I should write down the Battle of Baekgang. I kind of want to learn about that battle. Battle of Baekgang. That's a crazy ship. It's what I would think the Noah's Ark would look like. Yeah.
1953, the relationship between the two countries became somewhat awkward, and Kentoshi embassies effectively stopped for the next 40 or so years. By the beginning of the 8th century, though, the two countries had repaired their relationship, and in 702, embassies resumed and continued periodically thereafter for close to another 200 years. Early embassies had adopted a relatively safe route of travel, hugging the western coast of the Korean peninsula until making landfall in China. But as a result of the soured relations with the Silla kingdom in Korea, embassies from the 700s on were forced to cut directly across the East China Sea, a perilous route which often resulted in shipwrecks and disasters. As such, those who successfully made it to China typically stayed for several years, if not decades, and there is even the famous case of one Abe no Nakamaro who became a high-ranking bureaucrat in the Tang government and ended up staying in China permanently.
Okay.
Getting back to Japan, there were naturally some individuals in the political world who were less than thrilled with Tachibana no Moroe's administration and his recruitment of the Tang embassy returnees, Kibi no Makibi and Gembo. Chief among these was Fujiwara no Hirotsugu, son of one of the 4 Fujiwara brothers, Fujiwara no Umakai. Hirotsugu was at this time serving in a bureaucratic position in the Dazaifu in Kyushu, already amply at arm's length from the halls of power in the capital. And he
He looks
saw
very
Tachibana no
Irish.
Moroe's favoring of non-Fujiwara advisors as a direct attempt to oust his family from their perch at the top of the political totem pole. In the year 740, in an effort to have Kibi no Makibi and Gembo removed from their influential new roles in the government, Hirotsugu raised an army in Kyushu in rebellion against the central government in Nara. Faced
Just
with
like
this
that.
sudden military threat, the government, not unnaturally, dispatched their own army, and the two forces ultimately met in battle, with Hirotsugu's force being defeated and the man himself being executed shortly thereafter. Despite the rebellion being successfully extinguished, it was the largest internal military conflict since the Jinshin War, and it rocked not only Japan's political world, but also the psychological state of the country's sovereign, Emperor Shomu. Shomu's reign had by now seen several dramatic and worrisome episodes, beginning with the Prince Nagaya incident in 729 and continuing on with the smallpox epidemic that ravaged the country in the 30s.
So it was smallpox, okay, the plague was smallpox. I see. I mean, yeah, for a second I was gonna say, it wasn't that bad so far, like what happened during his reign. I mean, I guess there was a plague, there was a lot of political intrigue and killings, and now an open rebellion, and while technically he survived all this, yeah, I guess it's not the best ruling period,
And now this most recent rebellion in Kyushu. Emperor Shomu abandoned the new city of Heijokyo and began frantically transitioning his base of operations, moving through 3 different capitals in the span of 5 years before finally returning to Heijokyo in 745.
Okay. How much money are you wasting on this? Wow. In 5 years, that many capital.
We don't know exactly what the Emperor's reasoning behind his actions here was, but it seems clear that he was in a state of great unease, and it was during this phase of rapid capital jumping that he issued the 2 imperial decrees that would become the legacy by which he is remembered today.
Okay.
The first of these decrees, the Kokubunji Konnyu no Mikotonori, ordered the construction of special Buddhist temples and convents throughout Japan, and was based on a type of thinking called Chingokokka, basically the concept of relying on the power of Buddhism to bring peace and safety to the country. In his decree, the emperor was strikingly modest and even self-deprecating, and we get something of a glimpse at both his character and his mental state in its wording. Its opening lines are as follows. Despite the fact that I am poor in virtue, I have come into this position of most heavy responsibility, which is the office of emperor. I am as of yet unable to guide my people, and I am beset by shame day and night. As of late, the crop yield has been poor, and disease has been spreading, and it is to my disgrace that these are the results of my virtuelessness, and I do nothing but torture myself with guilt. Therefore, I have decided that I wish to pursue widespread happiness for all my people.
I mean, there's a lot of that throughout the story, right? It's a bit of a shame that, like, he basically decided that all of the bad stuff happening is because he wasn't religious enough, rather than, just the government is not doing the right choices. It's a bit of a shame because, he has the power to solve things with, like, better reform and laws, right? But at the same time, I cannot dislike a speech like that. I mean, at the very least, he's aware that he's kind of messed up and hasn't done the best choice, but it's still a bit of a shame that, he doesn't go the way of, like, trying to fix things with action, more just religion, A city called Kokubunji in the suburb of Tokyo, and the same place name exists all over Japan. Isn't there a dictionary called Kokubunji too? I think I heard the name before, maybe.
The temples which Emperor Shomu ordered constructed were to be called Konkomyo Shiten no Gokoku no Tera, and the nunneries were to be called Hokkemetsuzai no Tera, but today we refer to them as Kokubunji and Kokubun-niji respectively.
Nunneries.
They were built throughout Japan in close proximity to each province's kokuga, its administrative headquarters, and the combined presence of both institutions led these areas to become both the political and cultural centers of their respective provinces. While the emperor's decree itself was issued in 741, it is thought that the process of constructing the various temples was carried out over the next half-century or so, with many not being completed until near the end of the Nara period. Temple building in this era was the cutting edge of high technology, and it is said that the imperial court even began selling bureaucratic offices to individuals who gave large donations to aid in the costly construction efforts. The emperor chose particular Buddhist scriptures which aligned with the aforementioned Chingokokka concept, and he directed that the monks and nuns staffing the temples should spend their days copying and chanting these scriptures. He believed that if they did this properly, Japan would be pacified and protected by the various guardian gods of Buddhism, such as the Shitenno, who were, by the way, also a popular subject for sculpture in this era. Not just anyone could become a monk.
Emperor Shomu ordered the construction of one temple in every province. They were called Kokubunji, provincial temple. That's why the same place name exists all over Japan. I understand.
Or none in the Kokubunji and Kokubun-niji temples, but rather there was a strict licensing system overseen by the central government. This was due to the fact that Buddhist clergy were exempt from the various heavy taxes to which the general population was subject, and there was thus an overabundance of people hoping to join their ranks simply to escape taxation. The widespread existence of unsanctioned monks was actually a major social problem during this era, and the government was quite severe in its punishment of these individuals when they were caught. The second decree which Emperor Shomu issued during his years of capital hopping was the Daibutsu Zoryu no Mikotonori, the decree which ordered the construction of what we know today as the Nara Daibutsu. This decree was essentially an extension
It's a
of
big
its
statue.
predecessor, with the creation of the giant Buddha statue being yet another step in the plan to bring
Very
peace
cool.
to Japan through the power of Buddhism. It is said that Shomu had been greatly impressed by a Rushana Buddha statue that he had seen while on an imperial visit to the province of Kawachi, with this statue having been built thanks to the numerous small donations of that temple's parishioners. Shomu thus resolved to recreate this situation on a national scale, and he stated in his decree that even the smallest donation, from a blade of grass to a pinch of soil, would be permitted if it was given in contribution to the statue's construction.
It's kind of sad that, again, I feel like, obviously it's easy to say now, right? But it was so misguided, like the country had a lot of problem, and rather than like fixing it with better governments and better laws and better decrees, it decided to build like temples and statues, and now it's asking for donation for the statue. It's, it just feels like, what I understand that religion was very important, it probably didn't help anything and just made, the situation more, it just continued the situation of poverty and, not the best things happening in the country, yeah. It's a bit of a shame. I mean, it is like that in a lot of countries, when a ruler is kind of like getting lost in what to do to help the country, rather than go to me, a realistic way of like, making better laws and governing better, right? They go the religion way, which usually doesn't really fix anything, especially not with massive money project like this, that could go into like helping the country, the infrastructure and stuff like that, yeah.
However, he also warned his provincial governors and their district managers that they were by no means to force their peasants to donate. Despite these bold statements, the Daibutsu's creation would prove to be no mean feat, taking nearly 10 years to complete and requiring a massive number of donors, technicians, and laborers. In order to drum up support for the project, the emperor famously relied on a man named Gyoki, an itinerant monk who had built up great renown with the common people of Japan through years of traveling the country carrying out quality of life improving public works projects. The actual construction of the statue was carried out.
Then you should do like this Gyoki, Mr. Emperor. Yeah, like this monk wasn't building statue, he was building public improvements projects.
In fundamentally the same manner as any bronze statue of the time. A rough, basic shape was first constructed out of clay, and this was then covered in wax, which would be sculpted into a prototype version of the statue. This was then covered in a second layer of clay, and the entire thing was fired, hardening the clay, melting away the wax, and leaving a cavity into which molten metal could be poured. After the metal was poured and had cooled, the outer layer of fired clay was chipped away, and what remained was the finished bronze statue. In the case of the Nara Daibutsu, the finished product would be about 16 meters or 52.5 feet tall, so the process which
That is still pretty cool. I mean, I'm obviously, complaining about they could have done something better with the money, but man, look at this. I didn't think there would be such a massive foundation under the statue, yeah? But that's really interesting.
Just described was carried out in 8 parts, rather than doing the entire statue in one go. The completed statue weighed 380 tons and was plated in gold from top to bottom, and it was housed in a special hall called the Daibutsu-den, which was constructed in the temple complex of Todaiji in Heijō-kyo. Todaiji served as the head temple of the nationwide Kokubunji temples, and it still houses the Daibutsu statue today, though both temple and statue have seen numerous repairs and rebuilds. This name, Daibutsu, by the way, is just a Japanese word meaning large Buddha, and it is used in reference to a myriad of statues throughout Japan. The name of the actual Buddha represented by the statue is Rushanabutsu, a celestial being held to be the origin point of the universe, whose divine light illuminates all creation. When the statue was finally finished in 752, its Kaigen Kuyo ceremony, literally its eye-opening ceremony, where its eyes were painted in and its soul was believed to enter the statue, was carried out on a grandiose scale. In attendance were Emperor Shomu, by now retired, as well as his wife Komyoshi and his successor, the new Empress Koken. Song and dance was performed, and the eyes of the statue were painted in by an Indian monk named Bodai Senna, while 10,000 monks chanted Buddhist sutras around him.
That's pretty amazing.
The year after the completion of the Nara
That must have been one crazy scene to see with your own eyes.
Daibutsu saw the arrival in Japan of the Chinese monk Ganjin, a renowned holy man in his own country, who possessed the qualifications to administer ordination rites to those wishing to enter the clergy. During this era, no such monk yet resided in Japan, as the country was still, on the whole, relatively new to the Buddhist faith. This was a problem, however, because, as we previously discussed, Japan was striving earnestly around this time to set up an official system for those wishing to become monks and nuns. Emperor Shomu had actually sent 2 monks to China in search of such a qualified individual way back in the early 730s. But it had taken them a good 9 years to encounter Ganjin, and it then took him another 11 years to actually make it over to Japan. His successful crossing to the archipelago was...
Let me take off the translation. That's the kanji for France. Hello. Hello. Interesting. I know there's no... I know that in Japanese, France is just France. There's no like special word for it, but I've never seen it written in kanji like this, yeah? Okay. Omoshiroi.
Was actually his 6th such attempt, as both Tang Law and the treacherous path across the East China Sea made the voyage highly challenging, and he had completely gone blind in both his eyes by the time that he made it over. Nevertheless, upon his arrival, he promptly constructed an ordination platform at Todaiji Temple and ordained some 400 believers, including Empress Koken and the retired Emperor Shomu themselves. He went on to construct 2 more platforms, one in Kanto and the other in Kyushu, and then build his own temple, Tosho Daiji, in Heijokyo, which became the headquarters from which he founded the Risshu school of Buddhism. Risshu was one of 6 Buddhist sects which burst onto the scene in Japan during the Nara period, the others being Hossoshu, Kegonshu, Sanronshu, Jojitsushu, and Kushashu. They are collectively known as the Nantorokushu, or the 6 schools of...
The first 2 characters of kanji that represent the Netherlands, and the 3rd character is also used as the first letter of Spain. That all sounds very complicated.
Nara Buddhism, and they were all based in the
Kanjis
capital
are
of
very scary.
Heijokyo. They differed from later Buddhist sects in that they were less religious denominations and more so scholarly research circles dedicated to the study of Buddhist scripture, and they would go on to become deeply entrenched in the political scene in the capital. Before we move on to the new Empress Koken's reign, we must briefly discuss one more very important development that occurred while Emperor Shomu was pursuing his great religious projects. This was the passage in 743 of a law called the Konden Einen Shizai no Ho. This law was the natural extension of the Sanzei Shin no Ho, which we discussed in our last episode. A law which, you will recall, permitted the private ownership of land for up to 3 generations to those who newly opened it up for cultivation.
It's probably not a good idea if they revert it. I hope they don't revert it.
New law, however, took this to the extreme, waiving the time limit completely and allowing permanent ownership of land to those willing to go out and claim it from the wilderness, albeit with some minor restrictions. While this law was probably created to encourage support for the emperor's ambitious projects, it was the final straw in completely undermining the old public land system envisioned in the Taika Reform Decree nearly a century earlier.
But why is that bad? I mean, like, this all sounds like a positive to me.
Time and resource-rich aristocrats and religious establishments quickly took advantage of the new situation, employing runaway farmers as workers to reclaim new land and create the beginnings of vast private estates.
I see.
The existence of these estates, known to history as shoen, would go on to drastically shape the course of Japanese history. The aforementioned Empress Koken was the daughter of Emperor Shomu, and she ascended to the throne after her
Thank you for coming, my elf. See you next time. See you.
Father's retirement in 749. As we have seen with many emperors, particularly the female ones, it was common to have powerful bureaucrat advisors behind the curtain who were entrusted with the actual running of the day-to-day affairs of government. In the case of Empress Koken, this advisor was one Fujiwara no Nakamaro, son of Fujiwara no Michimaro, another one of the late Fujiwara brothers. Nakamaro rose high in the government thanks to the backing of Empress Koken's mother, the retired Empress consort Komyo, aka Komyoshi, who, as you will recall, originally came from the Fujiwara clan. Komyoshi naturally wanted to make sure that when her daughter came to the throne, it would be her family members pulling the strings behind the scenes. In 756, the retired Emperor Shomu died, and in the power vacuum he left behind, Fujiwara no Nakamaro's political influence grew even greater. Tachibana no Moroe, the imperial relative and statesman who we discussed at the beginning of this episode, was still around at this time, but an inappropriate statement he made at a drinking party led to him being falsely suspected of treason and retiring from politics. Completely independent from this, Moroe's son actually was plotting treason against the central government, hoping to overthrow Nakamaro and force Empress Koken into retirement so that she could be replaced with his own preferred candidate.
We are back to the crazy court politics, machination and backstabbings. Like, there was a bit of a break there, you know? I mean, sure, in between there was a plague, there was like a rebellion and all that, but we are back to the more classic, the machination of the court.
Unfortunately for him, this plot leaked prematurely, and he and his co-conspirators were arrested and jailed in 757. While they did officially get their death sentences commuted by the Empress, they all seem to have died incidentally after some lengthy torture ordered by Nakamaro. With Moroe's retirement and his son's ignominious death, the Tachibana clan's influence in the central government was thoroughly extinguished, and Nakamaro stood relatively unchallenged at the top of the political totem pole. One significant action which Nakamaro would undertake during his time in power was to implement the Yoro Ritsuryo law code created by his grandfather, Fujiwara no Fushito. While the code had been legally enacted in 718, it had never actually been put into effect due to Fushito's death and the emergence of the various anti-Fujiwara government actors like Prince Nagaya. Nakamaro's rise to the top allowed the code to finally be dusted off and brought out into the light of day. By the next year, 758, Nakamaro and the sitting ruler, Empress Koken, were no longer getting on as well as they once had, and so Nakamaro used his massive political influence to force the Empress into retirement and have her replaced by a new ruler, Emperor Junnin. Junnin came from a slightly different
At least there's no murdering this time.
line of descent than the last few emperors, being the grandson of Emperor Tenmu through his son Prince Toneri, the man who, as you will recall, was the author of the Nihon Shoki. With the throne occupied by a new ruler friendly to his ambitions, everything seemed to be going according to plan for Fujiwara no Nakamaro. But right at this moment, misfortune struck. Nakamaro's biggest backer, the retired Empress consort Komyoshi, passed away. Right around this time, the ruler whom Nakamaro had just pushed out of power, the retired Empress Koken, had begun to heavily favor a Buddhist monk named Dokyo, claiming that he had miraculously cured her of disease. The retired Empress still held plenty of influence in her own right, and without her mother to keep the situation in check, she and Dokyo came to butt heads with Nakamaro and his new puppet emperor Junnin. This tension came to a head in the year 764, when Emperor Junnin criticized Koken's adoring patronage of Dokyo, and the retired empress responded by stripping Junnin of his duties and declaring that she would henceforth carry out the affairs of government. Nakamaro was naturally quite alarmed by this development, and he began formulating a plot to seize control of the state's military apparatus and use it to take back his and Emperor Junnin's power. However, as seems to be a recurring theme here,
he's gonna die before getting to do anything.
Nakamaro's plan was leaked before it could be put into action, and he was forced to flee to Omi province, where he raised an army and attempted to set up yet another imperial prince as emperor. Ex-Empress Koken sent her own army after Nakamaro, choosing, interestingly, to put it under the command of the now 70-year-old Kibi no Makibi, who had still managed to retain his reputation for shrewdness after all this time. After some cat and mouse, the two armies finally clashed at Miyonosaki on the western coast of Lake Biwa, where Nakamaro was defeated, captured, and executed along with his entire family. This conflict is known today as the Rebellion of Emi no Ushikatsu, after the new name, Emi no Ushikatsu, which Emperor Junin bestowed upon Nakamaro during the peak of his power. In the rebellion's aftermath, Emperor Junin was officially removed from the office of emperor and exiled to the island province of Awaji in the Seto Inland Sea, dying just a year later at the age of 33. To replace him, ex-Empress Koken came out of her nominal retirement and reascended to the office which she had never wanted to leave in the first place, taking the throne under the new name of Empress Shotoku.
The Empress do pretty good. I mean, I'm actually kind of surprised, and I never really knew that there had been so many Empress in Japan's history. Not that they had been so effective, I would say, like so far in the last few periods. Yeah, there's been quite a few Empress, and you know, some have done some pretty great stuff. Some, I don't know if I would say great stuff, but you know, they've done a good job at like retaining their power, I guess, like she is. Yeah, I'm kind of surprised.
As we discussed back in episode 5, she's the second of only 2 Japanese emperors, or empresses rather, to have ever sat on the imperial throne twice, an act known in Japanese as choso. With the empress, who I will refer to as Shotoku from here on, back at the government's helm, the monk Dokyo only continued.
Wasn't there another like Prince Shotoku before? The one from Asuka period maybe? That was kind of like a very mythical figure, and we're not sure if he was real. Was he Shotoku? Or was it a different name? I definitely struggle with the name. I mean, this is a lot of names, obviously. As much as I love learning this history, down the line I won't remember that many names. I'll probably remember like the outline of events, but we did what? That's a lot.
Continued to expand his influence in the imperial court. It seems quite likely that he had in fact become the Empress's lover, and in 765 he was promoted to the position of Daijo Daijin Zenji, a unique post never seen before or after in history, which put a Buddhist religious spin on the position of Chancellor of the realm. The post doesn't seem to have a consistent English translation, but one which I simply like the ring of is First Minister and Master of Meditation.
Okay.
In that same year, Dokyo used his newfound authority to issue a decree banning the cultivation of new farmland by anyone other
I knew it wasn't gonna last.
than temples or shrines, setting up the country's religious establishments to gain a significant economic advantage over their secular peers. Just when it seemed that he couldn't grow any more powerful and influential, the Empress promoted him yet again in 766, giving him the title of Ho, which translates to something like Buddhist king. The thinking behind this new position was that Dokyo would reign
Doesn't seem very Buddhist to want so much power, you know?
over the religious world, while Empress Shotoku ruled the secular one. Perhaps his latest promotion had kicked his ambitions into overdrive, or perhaps he just knew that his position was precarious as long as he was relying on the Empress's favor. But either way,
it sounds like the kind of thing where kind of like we've seen so far so many times, he's getting too much power too obviously, so there's gonna be a lot of people mad and there might be another civil war.
It seems likely that it was around this time that Dokyo began to set his sights on the ultimate prize, the office of emperor itself. In 769, an oracle was issued by the Usajingu Shrine of Bizen province, which declared that making Dokyo emperor of Japan would bring peace and stability to the country. It is widely accepted today that Dokyo himself was behind this prophecy, but in the highly superstitious culture of Nara period Japan, such an oracle held great weight, and the imperial court was thrown into an uproar. Torn between her faith in her beloved Dokyo and her reluctance to allow a non-royal to sit on the imperial throne, the empress dispatched the aristocrat and civil servant Wakeno Kiyomaro to the shrine to double-check the oracle's authenticity, and he returned with the message that the original oracle had been mistaken.
What do they mean by checking the authenticity of the oracle? Isn't an oracle a person that just comes up with a premonition or a prophecy, I guess? So the monk just said that, the gods want me to be emperor, basically. How do you check if it's real or not? If, again, we believe that everybody at the time believed the oracles, how do you check the authenticity, or is the oracle something else? I don't know.
Kiyomaro's reward for a job well done was to have an angry Dokyo force him to change his name to Kitanamaro, which basically means Filthy Maro, and exile him to Osumi province in Kyushu.
Okay.
This did, however, mark the end of Dokyo's delusions of grandeur, as the empress died of disease the following year, and without her to protect him, he himself was promptly exiled off into the boondocks by his political opponents. Wake no Kiyomaro was allowed to return to the capital, and he was remembered by future generations as something of a hero, the man who had prevented the Japanese imperial throne from being usurped by a crooked monk, and his popularity has...
I mean, to be honest, I don't know how bad things would have been if the monk got onto the throne, right? Like, what would be his ambition beyond that? I don't know.
Persisted until the modern era, with his face even making it on to Japan's pre-World War II 10-yen bill. Most importantly, once Dokyo was gone, his law restricting new land cultivation to religious establishments was promptly repealed, and Japan's aristocracy could breathe a collective sigh of relief. They could finally get back to building up their own independent financial bases out in the provinces, an activity which was growing particularly profitable for our old friends, the Fujiwara clan.
Oh, the silvery
Before we
stuff.
end this video, I'd like to briefly touch on the art and culture of the Nara period, which is typically referred to as Tenpyo Bunka, or...
Which, kind of a tangent, but I had found what I was looking for, like, later stuff to potentially watch. I'd find this series of video, right here. Yeah, Japanese art history by Little Art Talk. They're 10-year-old video, but it does seem to be something interesting that we could watch eventually. A series of video about like the art history of different period. I think we'll take a look eventually.
Culture. This cultural flowering was focused around the reign of Emperor Shomu and was heavily influenced by cultural artifacts brought back from Tang China by the Kentoshi embassies.
Yeah.
These artifacts included not only Chinese items, but also items from the various countries along the Silk Road, such as India and Persia. Emperor Shomu in particular was an avid collector of such items, and upon his death his widow Komyoshi donated his collection to Todaiji Temple, where they were housed in the Shosoin repository. The collection contains such famous artifacts as the Radenshtan no Gogenbiwa, a 5-stringed lute elaborately decorated with mother of pearl, and the Torigiritsujo Byobu, a folding screen depicting slightly plump, thick-eyebrowed women, whose traits would have been classic markers of beauty in Tang Dynasty China. The Shosoin itself is actually a prime example of Nara period architecture, being built in the style of Azekura-zukuri, which piles up geometrically cut logs such that they interlock at the corners and create a sort of sawtooth pattern. The Nara period was also the era when bronze Buddhist statues began to be superseded by those made out of clay, called sozo, or those made out of hardened and lacquered cloth, called kanshitsuzo. A representative example of the former is Kofukuji Temple's 6-armed, 3-faced Ashura statue, with its
so
beautiful and youthful features that differ ever so slightly from face to face. A prime example of the latter is the Fuku Kensaku Kannon Bosatsu Ritsuzo at Todaiji, which stands 360 centimeters tall, nearly 12 feet, and strikes quite an imposing figure. Finally, the rugged old monk Ganjin, who we discussed earlier, is said to have brought over the first wooden Buddhist statuary to Japan, and this style of sculpture would go on to become the one most commonly seen in later eras due to the easy accessibility of wood as a material.
The skills to sculpt this kind of
Well, my
things.
friends, we have done it. We have managed to...
We've done it. Okay. Very interesting, the Nara period. I quite enjoyed this. Definitely a period that I think, I'd like to come back to eventually. I'm sure there's, more specific stuff to potentially cover. I'm always kind of mixed about the religious stuff. You guys know, obviously, I'm an atheist, right? I'm French, it's probably not that much of a surprise. And I've always been a bit mixed about religion, right? Like in some side of things, I'm like, let people live as long as it's like peaceful and, the rules of the religion is not making them anything that I consider too much. I don't really mind it. But then on the other side, like, especially when I look at history, right? But to be honest, it's the same today. I do really dislike when religion is used for any kind of political kind of plan, I guess. And what again, I think the Emperor of Shomu, is it? I can't believe that he genuinely believed that, things would be better if he like fully invest into religion and all that. It's still this kind of thing that feel kind of like what a shame, right? I mean, all the money wasted with all the moving in the capital, all the money wasted on all the Buddhist temple and the crazy statue, when I'm sure there was so many more like actual projects that could have benefited people, and just the way he kind of gave up on like fixing things with actual governing, and just relied on religion. So I tend to be quite a bit mixed about religion, right? So I try to be respectful, but I might not come across respectful sometimes. Yeah, I mean, tell me how I come across. I'm telling you what I think, at least. Obviously, as always, you're free to tell me what you think. But yeah, Nara period is pretty interesting. It really wasn't the messiest one. I mean, sure, there was 2 rebellions. There was the plague. There was a lot of like court machination, but I think that's all on par for the course. And for the most part, knowing some of the stuff that happens later, this was still, for the most part, a pretty peaceful era, I would say, because court machination always happen, and rebellion is there's always 1 or 2 here and there, right? So I'd say yeah, it wasn't such a bad period. I mean, if you're not a peasant, I guess. Yeah, like the peasants are really not having a good time. Even with some of the charms eventually reverted. I guess we'll see what happens. Like at this point, it's only the temples who control who gets the rice field. Yeah, we'll see what happens. Great video. Really interesting period. Really interesting period. Okay, so now we're ready to get into the next one, which is the Heian period, which is really long too, 3 videos. Part 1. Let's pass the intro.
On our last episode, we explored the life and reign of the quintessential Nara period monarch, Emperor Shomu, who built government-endorsed temples all throughout Japan and constructed the massive gilt bronze Daibutsu statue in Nara, all in the hopes of bringing stability to his country via the power of Buddhism. Sadly for Shomu, his death was only followed by more turmoil, with his successors Empress Shotoku and Emperor Junnin battling it out between themselves and various non-imperial interlopers such as Fujiwara no Nakamaro and the crafty monk Dokyo to see who would ultimately hold the true reins of power in the imperial court of ancient Japan. Empress Shotoku was ultimately the Pyrrhic victor of these conflicts, but when she died in 770, she left behind no children, and there was thus no clear candidate to succeed her on the imperial throne.
It's gonna be a mess.
The government's top-ranking aristocrats met together to decide her successor, and they settled upon the 62-year-old Prince Shirakabe, a grandson of Emperor Tenji, who was at the time serving in the position of Dainagon, or Chief Counselor of State. He ascended to the throne as Emperor Konin, becoming the first ruler of the Tenji line in nearly 100 years, as the period between the Jinshin War in 672 and Konin's accession in 770 was entirely monopolized by the descendants of our old friend Emperor Tenmu.
Yeah.
Initially, it seemed that the 2 lines would be brought together under Emperor Konin, as shortly after becoming emperor, he married a princess of the Tenmu line, and the child that she bore him the next year was quickly made crown prince. However, in 772, both the new empress consort and the infant crown prince were removed from their positions due to accusations that the empress had attempted to place a curse on her husband in the hopes of bringing their son to the throne ahead of schedule. In the baby boy's place, a new crown prince was elevated, this one being the son of Emperor Konin and another wife, an aristocratic woman whose family was originally of Baekje Korean descent. This son would eventually come to the throne in 781 as Emperor Kammu, and his actions would go on to define the era which was to follow.
I'm surprised they were okay with that. Foreign blood or something. Seems like so far they were like so strict about who can become emperor. Pure blood, noble family, stuff like that, right? So I'm surprised.
The early Heian period was, in short, the age of Emperor Kammu and his 3 sons, who went on to sit on the imperial throne in succession as the emperors Heizei, Saga, and Junna. During the Nara period, as we saw in our last episode, Emperor Shomu attempted to rely on the power of Buddhism to bring peace and safety to the Japanese archipelago. But this had the unintended side effect of greatly strengthening the political influence which the major Buddhist temples of Nara held. This culminated in the rise of the ambitious Buddhist monk Dokyo, who came frighteningly close to taking the imperial throne for himself.
And I'm guessing he's gonna have successors, right? I mean, more Buddhist monk with ambition beyond just the religion, I guess.
And the new Emperor Kammu thus had come to hold the opinion that the capital needed to be relocated somewhere slightly removed from the immediate influence of Japan's religious world. In 784, Emperor Kammu declared that the capital was to be relocated from Heijō-kyo, aka Nara, to a new location in what is modern Kyoto Prefecture, and this new city would be called Nagaoka-kyo. In addition to having some distance from the Buddhist powers that be in Nara, Nagaoka-kyo's geographical position also brought with it a number of attractive perks. The city would be built along the Yodo River, allowing easy access to the Seto Inland Sea. And it was also closer than the old capital was to Lake Biwa, Japan's largest lake and a major hub of transportation between the country's central and outer regions. The vast majority of capital-bound products produced on the...
At least that's logical, right? I mean, a lot of the capital change seem to not always have the best reason, but changing the capital to be in a place that makes a lot of sense in terms of the country, right? For like the trade and stuff like that, that makes sense, you know. I can't complain for a capital change if that's the reason, you know? Yeah.
The Sea of Japan side of the archipelago were ferried across Lake Biwa during some leg of their journey, so moving the capital closer to the lake would stimulate this domestic commerce and make it even easier to carry out. Finally, Nagaoka-kyo's location also allowed slightly easier travel to Tohoku, Honshu's northernmost region, which was an important point for the imperial court considering that they were still struggling to fully place this region under their control.
Really?
However, just because it was the emperor's will to relocate the old capital did not mean that everyone was on board with this plan. In particular, those in or with close ties to Japan's religious world were less than thrilled with the decision, and they and their allies were determined to make sure that the move to Nagaoka-kyo did not go as planned.
It's really like thinking about it, this is all like the classic of any country, right? I mean, the government has been giving, to different reasons and sometimes mistaken, giving more power to so many different factions, and they're all, eventually gonna cause trouble, right? Like first giving more power to the farmer, and then more power to, accidentally basically giving power to like, people will take advantage of the land system to gain their own power, local power, I guess. Then the Buddhist monk, giving them too much power. And then there's also like all the different families. I mean, every time you make a decision, I guess, like a countrywide decision, it has the potential of like backfiring down the line, as someone new will get more power out of it. And what will they do with that power? That's the thing.
The construction of the new capital was being overseen by Emperor Kammu's trusted advisor, Fujiwara no Tanetsugu, but in 785 he was mysteriously killed by unknown assassins. In a shocking turn of events, the name that bubbled to the surface after grilling a number of suspects was none other than Emperor Kammu's own younger brother, the Crown Prince Sawara. Sawara had actually spent his early years as a Buddhist monk, entering the clergy as a boy and not returning to the secular world until being given an imperial order to do so, when he and Kammu's father, Konin, became emperor. Prince Sawara was arrested and confined after his brother heard the accusations, but he vehemently denied his involvement in the assassination and eventually stopped eating entirely in protest. Nevertheless, he was deemed guilty and exiled to the province of Awaji, but he perished of self-imposed starvation.
Exiled, not executed.
Before reaching his final destination. A succession of calamitous events followed Prince Sawara's death, including several royal family deaths and the disastrous flooding of the Nagaoka-kyo construction site, and Emperor Kammu came to view the incomplete city as a...
He's gonna move it again.
location cursed by his brother's vengeful spirit, finally deciding in 794 to relocate the capital to a new spot slightly to the northeast. This location, still situated...
I have to look it up. How many times does this happen? How many times has Japan's capital been relocated? Is there like a number or something? I guess there's no number. I wonder if I can ask ChatGPT or something. It's saying once. I think it doesn't know. Like, it feels like it's probably been like over 100 times, right? It's already been like 10 to 20 times in just like the couple of videos we watched.
Nearby to the Yodo River and possessing all the same major geographic advantages which Nagaoka-kyo boasted, was to be christened Heian-kyo. The name Heian means peace in Japanese, and it is not hard to imagine.
It feels like a jinx. How peaceful is this period going to be?
That is exactly what Emperor Kammu was wishing for after the chaos
I
at
can understand
Nagaoka-kyo,
that.
as well as the decades of political tumult which had preceded his rise to the throne. Interestingly, the exact location for Heian-kyo was decided after soliciting the opinion of Wake no Kiyomaro, the aristocrat we met in our last episode, who helped stop Dokyo's rise to power back in the late 760s.
Yes.
Evidently, it was a good choice, as this new capital would go on to actually achieve the permanence which all its predecessors had failed to establish, eventually growing into the city that we know today as Kyoto, and remaining as Japan's capital for the next 1,000 years. Along with the change...
Okay, so... Oh, okay. So that's it. They don't keep changing it after this, okay. I see.
Change of location, the province in which the city would be located...
So I guess it's way less than 100. It's probably like 20, 30 times the capital has changed.
Was also renamed from Yamashiro, spelled with the kanji characters for mountain and back, to Yamashiro, spelled with the characters for mountain and castle. The province's original name was based on the fact that it had long been considered as being behind or to the back of the mountain range on the north side of Heijō-kyo. However, now, with the new capital being constructed here, a name with such backwater implications was seen as unbecoming, and the kanji characters were revised to correct this. The castle character was chosen based on Heian-kyo's naturally defensible location, nestled between two rivers and several mountains. It is thought that the choice of location for the new capital may have been based on Chinese feng shui thought, which places importance on a location's orientation in regard to the four cardinal directions. In Chinese mythology, the four directions are governed by the azure dragon in the east, the white tiger in the west, the vermilion bird in the south, and the black tortoise in the north. And in the Japanese interpretation of this mythology, these guardians are said to respectively dwell in rivers, roads, lakes, and mountains. With Heian-kyo having the Kamo River to its east, the Sanyo Road to its west, the Ogura Pond to its south, and Mount Funaoka to its north, it was situated in a phenomenally auspicious location. At 23 square kilometers, it was ever so slightly smaller than the old capital of Heijō-kyo, which was 25 square kilometers, but it did away with the outwardly jutting side segment of the old city, and was instead perfectly symmetrical, at least on paper. The Daidairi, the imperial palace compound, was larger than the old one in Heijō-kyo, and the main road cutting through the center of the city was wider than its predecessor at 84 meters, although it too was called the Suzaku-Oji, or Suzaku Avenue. This avenue ran from the Daidairi in the north down to the city's main gate in the south, the Rajomon, and this gate was flanked by the only two temples allowed in the city, Saiji, the West Temple, and Toji, the East Temple. The total population of the city is thought to have been in the neighborhood of 120 to 130,000, making it slightly more populous than the old capital.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the city as a whole seems to have gently sloped downward from the northeast, with its southwest quadrant being situated on low-lying marshland, and thus being only sparsely occupied by the city's residents. The number one goal for Emperor Kammu's regime was the reconstruction of the now more than a century-old Ritsuryo system. Between the expansion of Buddhist religious power, unrest and rebellion in the northern Tohoku region, and a tax policy too harsh to effectively function, the Ritsuryo system was on the verge of collapse. In other words, both the central government's authority and its finances were teetering on the edge of a precipice. Emperor Kammu began his administrative repair work by creating a number of new offices and posts, which existed outside the original stipulations of the Ritsuryo system. And these offices are collectively referred to as Ryogenokan, a word which literally means offices outside the Ryo, with Ryo being the original Ritsuryo law code. The first of these new offices to which we must direct our attention is the Kageushi, known in English as the Board of Discharge Examiners, an office which examined the documents that were created whenever a province's kokushi, aka its governor, changed. A kokushi's term lasted 4 years, and after handing over the baton to his successor, that successor was supposed to draw up and submit documents certifying that he had indeed taken over the office and its duties without problem. However, it was quite common for conflicts and corruption to arise during this baton-passing phase, and so the office of Kageushi was created to crack down on this and ensure that provincial governors were performing their jobs properly. It was quite a profitable job to be a kokushi in this era, as one was way out in the provinces overseeing tax collection far from the prying eyes of the imperial court, and the central government needed to make sure greed wasn't getting the better of their governors if they wanted to actually see any of their tax revenue.
Yeah.
A second Ryogenokan post created during the reign of Emperor Kammu was the one that would go on to greatly shape and be shaped by the course of Japanese history. The office of Seitai Shogun, often
Shogun.
referred to by modern folk simply as Shogun.
I've been waiting for any kind of government post name that I actually recognize. So far it's been so many that I've never really heard about before. Here we go. We've got one. We've got one that will definitely be pretty important.
This office would go on to become the top position in Japan's warrior society of later centuries, its holder acting as the de facto ruler of the country. But at the time that it was created, it was no more than a very high-ranking military position. It is often translated into English as barbarian subduing generalissimo,
I've never heard that before.
which is a kind of awkward and unwieldy term, but
Yeah, especially generalissimo sounds what's his name from Italy, World War II? Mussolini? Sounds like something Mussolini would call himself. I think he might have actually.
to put it more plainly, the Seitai Shogun was the general placed temporarily in command of the central government's military operations against the northern Emishi people. The Emishi, as you may recall from our second episode on the Asuka period, were the people inhabiting the as of yet unconquered parts of the Tohoku region of Japan.
I thought in one of the other episodes he said that it had been conquered, but maybe I misremembered. It's like they tried to, yeah. And yeah, as he's saying, yeah. It's not Hokkaido Ezo, yeah. Yeah. It is interesting, that still at this point they don't have all of Honshu conquered and under control, right? I mean, I don't know. It sounds like the government is, strong. I'm surprised they just haven't conquered the rest of Emishi yet. Yeah, they're kind of dragging their feet with that. It's been a couple 100 years.
The northernmost region of the main island of Honshu. The Ritsuryo system was teetering all throughout Japan, but it was easily at its most unstable in the Tohoku region, a point exemplified by an Emishi rebellion in 780, which saw the imperial court's main base of operations in the north, Taga Castle, aka Tagajo, burned to the ground. Taga Castle, located in modern Miyagi Prefecture, was the seat of the Chinjufu, a key military government agency entrusted with the pacification and control of northern Japan, and its destruction was an affront to the court which demanded retribution. This retribution was fruitlessly entrusted to several generals in the subsequent years, but it would be a man named Sakanoue no Tamuramaro who would finally see it carried out successfully.
Is it a shogun?
Tamuramaro, an experienced officer who had already seen action in numerous campaigns in northern Japan, was appointed Seitai shogun by the emperor in 801 and tasked with...
But hard is it because what I'm understanding is that in Emishi it's mostly probably like tribes and clan, right? It's not like, there's like a massive army or anything, right? So I guess they're struggling because it's more like guerrilla war, maybe?
subduing the rebellious Emishi tribes once and for all.
Yeah, tribes.
The main base of the antagonistic Emishi forces was in the region of Isawa, in the fertile middle basin of the Kitakami River. And here, Tamuramaro at last managed to best the coalition army in battle. That army was led by the legendary Emishi general Aterui, a man who had been a thorn in the court's side for many years at this point, and whom Tamuramaro seems to have quite respected as a worthy foe. Tamuramaro brought Aterui and his lieutenant More back to the capital alive as prisoners, whereupon he petitioned the emperor to pardon the two men, claiming that they could be helpful in rebuilding and maintaining order in the newly conquered Emishi regions. The emperor and his advisors would have none of this, however, and both men were executed as the perpetrators of unforgivable crimes against the imperial court. Tamuramaro returned to Tohoku, where he constructed the castle of Isawa-jo, aka Isawa Castle, and then later pressed even further north and built Shiwa-jo, aka Shiwa Castle, in what is the modern prefecture of Iwate. Jo, by the way, is the Japanese suffix meaning castle, and I don't know those prefecture yet. I mean, the first prefecture stream I did was Hokkaido, so I know Hokkaido, but Emishi or like northern Honshu, I don't think we touched on any of this prefecture yet. Yeah, not yet at least. Probably be using the words somewhat interchangeably throughout the remainder of this series. With the success of Sakanoue no Tamuramaro's campaign, Imperial Japan's borders were pushed significantly farther north, and the greater part of northern Japan fell under the court's dominion, although campaigns to push the borders even further would continue thereafter. The crackdown on provincial government corruption and the subjugation of the troublesome Emishi were a solid start for Emperor Kanmu in his quest to shore up the rickety Ritsuryo system. But another big problem still stood in his way: Japan's suffocatingly heavy tax system. As we have seen in previous episodes, the tax burden which the Ritsuryo system imposed on Japan's peasantry was brutal enough to cause such widespread social problems as census fraud, the abandonment of farmland, and the proliferation of unauthorized holy men hoping to take advantage of religious tax exemptions. Emperor Kanmu set about tackling this problem by relaxing his country's tax system in several key ways. First, he established the Konde no Se, literally the stalwart youth system, as a new militia system for the provinces. Rather than forcing young peasant farmers to leave their fields for long periods of time to serve in the local militia, the new system would instead require the young men of the provincial leadership class, basically the sons and relatives of district managers and particularly wealthy farmers, to undergo training and defend the headquarters of their respective provinces. Under this new system, there would be fewer active duty soldiers, but individuals who were already particularly skilled in archery and horsemanship were singled out for service.
It sounds good for the peasants, right? Now they don't have to worry about this anymore, but I don't think those nobles are gonna be pretty happy about this.
So not only were peasants getting a break from military duty, but the militias themselves were also seeing a marked quality boost. It should be noted, however, that the old conscription system was left in place in Tohoku in the north and Kyushu in the south, the two parts of the country which the government wanted to make absolutely sure were well stocked with troops at all times. Either way, this fundamental change in the military system from mass peasant conscription to a reliance on a smaller core of elite and wealthy individuals who were valued for their personal martial prowess would begin to pave the way for the unique warrior culture that would define Japan for centuries to come. The second tax break, which
I guess I'm wrong then, it means it's gonna work out. Yeah.
Emperor Kanmu implemented was, well, an actual tax break, specifically one targeting Zoyo taxes and Kusuiko loans. You may recall the Zoyo taxes from our 5th and 6th episodes as the 4th pillar tacked on to the Soyocho tax triad. Zoyo was a tax paid in physical labor, otherwise known as corvée, requiring peasants to work for free for 60 days a year under the direction of provincial governing officers. Emperor Kammu slashed this obligation in half, reducing it to only 30 days a year. Still an infuriating prospect when viewed from a modern perspective, but a major improvement nonetheless.
Like, do you have to work 30 days in one go, or can you just do like 1 day a week or something? Because if you go 30 days one go and you're not getting paid, how do you survive? I'm assuming most peasants don't really have any saving, right? So maybe you can just do like 1 day a week or something. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess it depends. Like, if it's in the town you're living that, you know, you can do the work, yeah, but if you have to go somewhere else, maybe not.
The emperor's second target, Kusuiko, was a mandatory loan system. I repeat, mandatory, wherein the government would lend farmers a certain amount of rice every year, force them to plant it, and then collect interest on the harvested crop. This interest was initially charged at a mind-boggling 50%, but Emperor Kammu reduced it to an ever so slightly more reasonable 30%. These three elements, military conscription, the Zoyo corvée,
it's concession, but is that good enough? I don't know.
And the Kusuiko loan were known as the three great burdens of the Ritsuryo tax system. And by relaxing all of them, the emperor made it more likely that his subjects would actually farm their land and pay their taxes properly, a prospect which was ultimately beneficial not only for the common people, but also for the imperial treasury. The final adjustment which the emperor made to the old Ritsuryo system was to adjust the length of the interval between reassignments of farmland. Remember, at this point, the majority of the country's farmland still belongs to the state and is effectively lent to the farmers who work it. As new farmers are born and
I thought it had passed on to the Buddhist temples.
Old farmers die, that land needs to be redistributed so that it continues to be cultivated. And up until this point, that redistribution was carried out every 6 years. However, the actual process of taking a new census, tabulating all the farmland in the country, and figuring out which land needed to be given to whom was a massively complex and labor-intensive task. Doing it at a frequency of once every 6 years was in fact so daunting that more often than not, it didn't really get done, leaving large amounts of land unassigned and large amounts of potential tax revenue uncapitalized upon. Emperor Kammu adjusted the interval from 6 years to 12, hoping that the extra leeway between reassignments would ensure that the whole process actually got done properly. Even despite the emperor's best efforts, the imperial court's finances failed to experience any drastic improvements, and in 805, Emperor Kammu called together two of his top advisors, Fujiwara no Otsugu and Sugano no Mamichi, to debate what next steps the government ought to take. In this debate, remembered to his...
I'm trying to think of like, what would be the logical thing if he's not going to completely redo the Chibadan system? Like, what else could be done? But I don't know. My head isn't big enough for this level of thinking.
As the Tokusei Souron, Fujiwara no Otsugu boldly declared that the military campaigns in the north and the construction of the capital of Heian-kyo were the two prime culprits behind.
I mean, yeah. Like the military campaign, you could at least justify by, if you pacify the land, you have more land and more subjects, and, in the long term, this is good. But constantly moving the damn capital is like an insane money sink. I think that's pretty obvious.
Behind the government's fiscal problems, and that both ought to be called off immediately. Sugano no Mamichi argued that because the Chinese emperors engaged in grand projects such as these, Emperor Kammu should continue to do so as well. But
the Chinese have like insane amount of land, insane amount of people, insane amount of history and wealth to rely on. I mean, don't look to your neighbors to do exactly what they do. I mean, look for inspiration, but adapt it to your own country.
The emperor ultimately sided with Otsugu, and both activities were brought to a halt. The city of Heian, despite having been home to the emperor and the court for more than a decade now, was still only about half finished going by the original construction plan, and with the emperor's decision, the city would be left permanently incomplete.
Also, I don't know if you know enough about architecture to say that, right? But same thing with like the style of the city building. You know, is it really beneficial for Japan? This style of like city building mimicking Chennai city? Yeah.
Here on, the city would continue to grow and evolve naturally, eventually becoming the medieval metropolis of Kyoto, but the vision of its original architects was never fully realized.
Maybe
As
it's a good
mentioned
thing.
earlier, Emperor Kammu had prohibited the powerful temples of Heijokyo from relocating to the new capital, taking a somewhat wary and standoffish posture towards them, and building only the state-sponsored temples of Saiji and Toji in the new city. This atmosphere of distrust for the old guard of Japanese Buddhism created an environment ripe for the flowering of new schools of Buddhist thought, and it is no coincidence that this is the era that birthed two of Japan's most famous holy men, Saicho and Kukai.
I was gonna say
The
no
former,
Kukai.
Saicho, was born into a wealthy Gozoku family in Omi province, entering into the priesthood at age 13 and receiving official ordination rites at Todaiji Temple at the age of 20. At this time, only 10 monks a year were permitted to receive these rites, putting Saicho in the top layer of the country's elite monks. But only shortly thereafter, he discarded his newly acquired status and entered into the wilderness of Mount Hiei on the border of the modern Kyoto and Shiga prefectures to seek enlightenment among nature. During this period, he eventually came to the conclusion that he must travel to China to study Buddhism at its source, and in 804 he managed to secure a place on an outgoing Kentoshi embassy to the Tang. Also on this voyage, though boarding a different vessel, was a young monk named Kukai, 8 years Saicho's junior.
I think Kukai is the one that, well, he is the big one in terms of modernizing Buddhism into, I think, the Shinto version, if I'm not wrong. And he's also like the one behind changing Japan's writing system into much more of like its own system, still based on Chinese, but you know.
Who was the son of a Gozoku family of Sanuki province on the island of Shikoku. Kukai had initially traveled to Heijokyo to study at a university there in preparation to become a bureaucrat. But during his studies, he became enamored by the mysteries of Buddhism and eventually dropped out of school to carry out Buddhist training in the wilderness, much like Saicho had. It is unknown exactly how the no-name Kukai managed to secure his spot on the 804 embassy to the Tang, but either way, he and Saicho made landfall on the Asian continent in the late summer of that year. The men would return to Japan in 806 and 805 respectively, after only a short period in China, with Saicho having studied the Tendai school of Buddhism, and Kukai having studied the Shingon or True Word school, with particular emphasis on Mikkyo, literally secret teachings, a tradition of pseudo-magic rituals passed on only by word of mouth. Saicho, who returned first, built the temple of Enryakuji on his old stomping grounds of Mount Hiei, and became the founder of Japanese Tendai Buddhism.
Where does he find the money for this though?
Preaching the idea that all people, highborn or low, were capable of achieving Buddhahood after death. He also espoused that members of the clergy should stay away from the affairs of government and instead spend their time helping people, an idea which may have won him some popularity with Emperor Kammu,
Sounds pretty good.
who permitted the Tendai sect to become an official government-recognized school of Buddhism within
I'm preaching the separation of church and state before it was a popular thing to do. Okay, it's pretty good.
Japan. Kukai, upon his return to Japan, built the temple of Kongo-Buji on Mount Koya in the northeastern part of modern Wakayama Prefecture.
Where do you find the
became
money?
the founder of the Japanese school of Shingon Buddhism. Kukai's brand of Buddhism placed the Buddha Dainichi Nyorai, also known as Vairocana, at its center as the universe's most important celestial being, and it espoused the idea that humans could attain Buddhahood in this life while still living. It also placed emphasis on using prayer rituals to drive away misfortune and obtain benefits in the mortal world, a concept which not only built the foundations for much of modern Japanese Buddhism, but was also very popular with the aristocratic layer of society, and led to a close bond between them and the Japanese Shingon school of Buddhism.
It is inescapable, yeah. I guess this is the guy you owe it to all the amount of rituals that Japan do. I mean, I'm a fan of sumo, I watch sumo all the time. Actually, a tournament just finished yesterday. And part of sumo is still some of the old rituals. So like when the Rikishi enter the ring, they have to like throw salt to ward off evil spirits. There's rules like women cannot enter the ring because of like old beliefs. There's a lot of like rituals that really lasted for I guess 1,000 years, yeah. And it's not just in sumo, right? It's in a lot of Japan society, right? I think even a lot of people who don't really believe in religion, they still take part in rituals, like the New Year, like praying, stuff like, leaving offering at shrines, stuff like that, right? So it's really interesting. I find it quite interesting. I do kind of appreciate how Japan treats, religion today. The way, again, like a lot of people don't really believe in it, but they still participate in it. You know what I mean? I kind of like it.
Kukai spent many years after his return to Japan traveling around the country, particularly his home island of Shikoku, engaging in public works projects and expending great efforts to improve the lives of the common people of Japan.
Very nice.
Numerous legends about him exist to this day in nearly every corner of the country, and just in Shikoku there are 88 temples which claim to be connected to him in some way. He is credited with building many of the hot springs and water reservoirs throughout Japan, and is even said to be responsible.
So, I'm guessing donation, right? Like, the government wasn't giving him money, and it's not like he was, printing money himself. So, I'm guessing he wasn't rich, but through donation he managed to do all this.
For the famous noodle dish Sanuki Udon, a local specialty in modern Kagawa Prefecture, which...
Yes, we learned about Sanuki in Kagawa Prefecture in another stream I did. Watch the VOD if you want.
Kukai is said to have invented after learning noodle-making techniques in Tang, China.
Really?
He's also held to be one of Japan's 3 great calligraphy masters, and is said to have been able to write with 5 brushes at once, holding 1 in each hand, 1 with each foot, and 1 in his mouth. Given the number of legends surrounding his life, it should probably come as no surprise that there are a number of sayings in the Japanese language in which Kukai is referenced. One of the most prominent of these is "Koubou ni mo fude no ayamari," which means even Kukai makes mistakes in his writing, and is the equivalent of the English sayings "nobody's perfect" or "everyone makes mistakes." Another saying is "Koubou fude o erabazu," which means Kukai isn't picky about which brush he uses, and is similar to the English saying "a good workman doesn't blame his tools." Kukai's posthumous honorific name, by the way, is Koubou Daishi, which is why you're not hearing the name Kukai in either of these sayings. Whatever you prefer to call him, this great monk's life's work would not end until the year 8.
It is a saying that gets very confusing in Japanese. Like I was talking about sumo, and in sumo it's something that I also understand its tradition, but it's pretty annoying. Rikishi on the come up, they would have a name. Then, if they make it toward the top, like Julio and Makauchi division, they might change name. Then when they reach one of the top 2 rank, Ozeki and Yokozuna, they might also change name. So, for example, like, if anyone is watching these days, there's Koto no Waka. That was his name on the come up. Then, when he became Ozeki, he changed his name to Koto Zakura. And then, eventually, if he retires and become like a stable master, he might change his name again, kind of like Akuo became Coach Miyagino, because you inherit the name of coach, I guess, and it becomes really confusing, like how names just keep changing and passing with tradition. I don't really love that much. I like when people have one name so I don't get confused. I can't lie. Yeah. Kirishima becoming Kirishima, yeah. That's another one. Kirishima who just won the tournament.
35 when he passed away at the age of 62. Or, if you believe the legends of Mount Koya, he entered into eternal meditation in the temple complex's inner sanctuary, which he continues to this very day. However, 835 is a bit farther ahead than we need to be right now, so I'm going to take this opportunity to rewind the clock back several decades to 806, the year when Kukai had just returned to Japan from Tang, China. It was in this year that the man who had raised the curtain on the Heian period, Emperor Kanmu, passed away at the ripe old age of 70.
Not bad.
Kanmu was succeeded by his eldest.
You know, I like Kanmu. It really, seemed like one of the good one. It, did a couple good decisions. He didn't mess up anything too bad. I think he wasn't too bad. Kanmu is one of the good ruler, I would say.
Son, who ascended to the throne as Emperor Heizei and continued the trend of strong imperial rule established by his father. During Heizei's reign, a woman named Fujiwara no Kusuko came to be greatly favored by the new emperor, and she rose high in the imperial court under his patronage. She was actually the daughter of Fujiwara no Tanetsugu, the man in charge of building Nagaoka-kyo, whose assassination kicked off the long string of unfortunate events there. Kusuko became acquainted with Emperor Heizei while he was still crown prince, when her daughter became one of his wives and, following custom, she moved to the palace together with the girl. Despite their mother-in-law, son-in-law relationship, Emperor Heizei seems to have found Kusuko more appealing than her daughter, and the two ended up beginning an illicit love affair on the side.
He likes the milk.
Following Heizei's coronation, Kusuko would rise to the rank of Jusanmi, or junior third rank, and become the head of the Naishi no Tsukasa, otherwise known as the handmaid's office, where she fulfilled a role akin to the emperor's secretary. Kusuko's older brother, Fujiwara no Nakanari, also managed to ride his sister and niece's coattails to a position of significant influence. However, Emperor Heizei was a sickly man, and in 809, by reason of illness, he passed on the imperial throne to his younger brother, who ascended to the throne as Emperor Saga. Naturally, Kusuko and her brother, who had been enjoying the trappings of power under Emperor Heizei, were none too pleased about this, and they eventually persuaded the retired emperor that he ought to make a return to the throne. Heizei, who had recovered from his illness by now, began gathering political allies, and in 810 he issued an imperial order moving the capital from Heian back to Heijō-kyo. As you will recall, there were many political actors who were unhappy with the move to the new capital in the first place.
I thought Kyoto was it for 1,000 years, like, come on.
So the retired emperor quickly gained a lot of backers supporting his comeback bid, and his actions here temporarily created a situation in which, effectively, two capitals and two emperors existed. The true sovereign, Emperor Saga, was having none of this, however, and he immediately embarked on some quick and decisive military action.
Like, dude, you were sick, you told me to become the next emperor, and now you're trying to come back, I mean, come on.
He had Kusuko's brother Nakanari arrested and executed by bow and arrow all in the span of a day, and then sent troops under the conqueror of the north, Sakanoue no Tamuramaro, to prevent Heizei from leaving the old capital to raise troops. The retired emperor realized he had been beaten, and after surrendering, he shaved his head and entered into the Buddhist priesthood as a gesture of his total lack of further ambition. Following this, the despondent Kusuko, with her ambitions shattered beyond repair, committed suicide by poison. This whole course of events was long called the Fujiwara no Kusuko.
You know, you could have just lived happy, rather than, like, do all this. I'm sure they were still pretty rich and all that, I mean. You know, I never understand that kind of thinking, like, maybe it's because I have no ambition in life, outside of maybe making enough money to not have worry about money, right? But, they've been emperor for a bit, she was the wife of the emperor for a bit, then he retired, and they were probably rich as well, probably has nothing to worry about for the rest of their life, get out of politics, just live a good life, I don't know. Yeah, and now, the guy become a monk and she heals herself, I mean, it doesn't seem worth it. I don't know. Eternal ambition, I guess. Infinite ambition for some people.
Incident, but in recent years it has come to be referred to more and more as the retired Emperor Heizei incident.
And
the original name was probably derived from a desire to protect Emperor Heizei's reputation and shift blame away from the imperial house. Indeed, Heizei was pardoned afterwards and allowed to live out the remainder of his days in peace and quiet. However, modern scholars are now acknowledging the fact that the retired emperor was a grown man acting of his own free will, and regardless of any persuasion that he may have received from Cusco, he was ultimately the more powerful figure in the relationship, and thus the one on whom responsibility ought to fall. One major byproduct of the retired Emperor Heizei incident was the creation of another Ryōgen-no-kan office, the Kurodo-dokoro, an office which was in charge of handling the emperor's top-secret correspondence. And
it's kind of fun to say, Kurodo-dokoro. Yeah, that's fun.
It is known in English as the Chamberlain's Office. During the height of the commotion, Emperor Saga had experienced significant difficulty keeping confidential information from falling into the hands of Heizei and his allies, and so he established the office as a response to this. Saga's closest advisor during the power struggle with Heizei had been a man named Fujiwara no Fuyutsugu, and as a reward for his loyal service, Fuyutsugu became the first man appointed to be head of the new Chamberlain's office, a position known as Kurodo no To. You may have noticed, by the way, that we had Fujiwaras on both sides of the field in this incident, and this of course begs the question, why are Fujiwaras suddenly fighting other Fujiwaras? Well, if we wind the clock back nearly a century, you will recall that the architect of the Taiho and Yoro Ritsuryo codes, Fujiwara no Fuhito, was succeeded in the political world by his 4 sons, the 4 Fujiwara brothers. These brothers all had children of their own, some of whom we have already met, and each of these lines came to be referred to by its own distinct moniker. The Hokke, or the Northern House, the Nanke, or the Southern House, the Kyoke, or the Kyo House, and the Shikike, or the Shiki House. The latter two are derived from the names of specific court posts, by the way. Anyway, with the Fujiwara clan having split off into these 4 distinct lines, it wasn't long before each line's goals began to diverge and rivalries began to build between them. Fujiwara no Cusco and her brother were members of the Shiki House, while Fuyutsugu was of the Northern House, and with he and Emperor Saga's victory in the retired Emperor Heizei incident, the Northern House came to be the most prominent and powerful branch of the Fujiwara clan. If Emperor Kammu's reign had been focused on strengthening the Ritsuryo system out in the provinces, then Emperor Saga's reign was focused on strengthening it in and around the capital. He is particularly famous for creating the imperial police organization, known in Japanese as the Keibishi. This organization was yet another Ryōgen-no-kan office, an office not stipulated in the Ritsuryo code, and it was in charge of maintaining order and enforcing the law within Heian-kyo. Prior to this, peasant farmers had been forced to take turns serving as guardsmen in the capital for periods of a year at a time.
I was wondering that before, yeah, like they kept talking about the legal code, but you know, I didn't think it was really like a police force or anything enforcing it.
But with the creation of the Keibishi, the capital now had its own professional armed peacekeeping force. The second major act for which Emperor Saga is remembered today is his creation, or rather his ordering of the creation, of the Kōnin Kyakushiki, a document compiled to aid in the implementation of the Ritsuryo Code's various laws. Its name very literally comes from it being a collection of kyaku and shiki, with the former, kyaku, being supplements and amendments to the original content of the Ritsuryo Law Code, and the latter, shiki, being detailed explanations of how the various laws worked in practice. By compiling all of these together in one official document, the emperor could reduce legal confusion and in doing so, further increase the authority of the central government. 2 more of these, the Jogan Kyakushiki and the Engi Kyakushiki, would be created in the following 2 centuries, and together they are known as the Sandai Kyakushiki, or the 3 Great Kyakushiki. The Kōnin Kyakushiki would also be followed up in the reign of the next emperor, Emperor Junna, by a document called the Ryo no Gige, which was the imperial court's official book on how to correctly interpret the Ritsuryo Code. It is from this document, by the way, that modern scholars have been able to ascertain the...
It's like, you know, rather than making like a bunch of side books to explain the main book, just rewrite the main book in a more, you know, easy to understand way. I don't know. Like, you know, if it was written in such a confusing way in the first place, all the laws, I mean, maybe rewrite it rather than writing a bunch of like side book to explain the main book. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Original content of the Yoro Ritsuryo law code, as the code itself no longer exists, but it is described in detail in the Ryo no Gige. Most images I have shown in previous episodes depicting the Ritsuryo code have come from the various iterations of this document. Emperor Saga's successor, his younger brother Emperor Junna, was the last son of Emperor Kammu to sit on the imperial throne, and he would continue the pattern of strong rule established by his predecessors. However, Fujiwara no Fuyutsugu and the northern house of the Fujiwara clan would continue to maintain their presence at the heart of government, and their influence would only continue to grow over the coming decades.
I'm guessing they're getting back on the throne.
Eventually culminating in a level of power which would leave their family name indelibly inked into the fabric of history.
Very interesting.
That, however, is a tale for next time.
It is a tale for right now. No next time. Next time is right now. Fascinating. Really enjoying the Heian period. Fascinating. Obviously, I think it only gets more interesting when, the farther we advance, because there's a lot more history to cover. There's a lot more records with details on everything. So yeah, it really gets quite interesting. And yet we're still before the year 1000. So, part 2.
When we concluded our last episode, Emperor Saga had just succeeded in preventing his older brother, the retired Emperor Heizei,
we can pass the recap,
which he must have wished his older brother had followed. As a result, the power of the retired emperor as a political figure was reduced somewhat, and Japan entered into a period where, for a time, the sitting emperor's status eclipsed that of his retired forebear. Saga and Junna seem to have had a sort of...
Which seems like it would be the most logical thing, right? And yet it wasn't like that before, yeah?
Unofficial agreement wherein their respective lines would inherit the throne in an alternating fashion, with Saga passing on the emperorship to Junna, Junna eventually giving it to Saga's son, Emperor Nimmyo, and Nimmyo then designating Junna's son, Prince Tsunesada, as his heir. Again,
nice.
These circumstances likely arose out of a desire not to repeat the events of the retired Emperor Heizei incident, wherein imperial family members were at each other's throats over the issue of succession. However, as we see so often in history, it was not long before things began to take a turn for the unexpected. Junna and Saga passed away within 2 years of each other, 840 and 842 respectively. And in the vacuum left behind after their deaths, the delicate balance of power they had constructed quickly began to crumble as the result of an incident called the Jowa Incident, or Jowa. This incident began just before Saga's passing, as the retired emperor lay on his deathbed, when a secret letter was delivered to Saga's highest-ranking wife alleging that an aristocrat named Tomono Kawamine was plotting treason against the sitting emperor, Emperor Nimmyo. Not only that, but Kawamine was allegedly planning to set up Crown Prince Tsunesada as the figurehead around which he would organize this rebellion. This letter was quickly given over to the imperial court's Chunagon, or vice counselor of state, a man named Fujiwara no Yoshifusa, and he began to make moves to deal with the alleged traitors. Yoshifusa, by the way, was not just another random Fujiwara. I know we've met quite a lot of them at this point. Yeah. Rather, he was the son of our old friend Fujiwara no Fuyutsugu of the Fujiwara clan's northern house. We became acquainted with Fuyutsugu at the end of our last episode as the close confidant of Emperor Saga, who helped the emperor triumph in the retired Emperor Heizei incident and was rewarded for his service with the position of Kurodo no To, head of the chamber.
I think beyond the name confusing me, it's also, a lot of the art of the time looks the same, right? It's not like they've got anime character design which really try to be super standard, not saying something in a racist way, but a lot of these old arts look the same. People's beard and face look very much the same, so, I already struggle with names, and then you show me picture of people who look the same, so I struggle a little bit more with that, yeah, I can't lie. It is a bit hard to keep up which Fujiwara is what.
Chamberlain's office. Following the delivery of the secret letter to Yoshifusa, soldiers were dispatched to guard the imperial palace. Tomono Kawamine was arrested, and Prince Tsunesada was removed from his position as heir to the throne. He would be replaced by his younger half-brother, Prince Michiyasu, whose mother just happened to be Vice Chancellor Yoshifusa's younger sister. Given this, and the fact that a number of other political rivals to Yoshifusa would end up being exiled as co-conspirators in the plot, the entire Jowa incident is often suggested to have been a setup by Yoshifusa himself. This incident is typically taught in Japanese schools as the first of several instances of the Fujiwara clan implementing Machiavellian political machinations to eliminate their rivals and advance their own power, a phenomenon known in Japanese as tashi haiseki, literally the expulsion of other clans. With the elimination of his rivals and the elevation of his nephew to crown princehood, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa's political capital only continued to rise in the imperial court, and he enjoyed a number of promotions both in office and rank. His nephew, Prince Michiyasu, would eventually become emperor in 850, ascending to the throne as Emperor Montoku, and under the new administration, Yoshifusa found himself promoted to the position of Daijo Daijin, or Chancellor of the Realm, the highest office in the imperial government. He arranged to have his daughter, Akira Keiko, married to Emperor Montoku, and when the union produced a son, Yoshifusa had the infant boy proclaimed crown prince, despite the existence of several older half-brothers. Conveniently for Yoshifusa, Emperor Montoku would die suddenly of disease less than a decade later, and the young crown prince would ascend to the imperial throne at the tender age of 9 as the Emperor Seiwa. As we discussed a number of episodes ago, raising children to the post of emperor was an act generally avoided during the first few centuries of Japan's monarchy. But with the ascension of the young Emperor Seiwa, it would begin to become a trend.
Yeah, but I guess the Fujiwara, they're definitely playing by that playbook of, who cares if someone is way too young to be emperor? I can just control them behind the scene, right? With all the machination they're doing, obviously they'd be the one to do that. No surprise.
Yoshifusa knew that the young boy would not actually be able to manage the affairs of state, and that he, as the boy's grandfather, would be able to act as the de facto ruler of the empire. Further securing Yoshifusa's foothold was the fact that Seiwa had literally grown up at his own villa, as it was customary in this era for imperial children to be raised in the households of their mothers' families. In this way, Yoshifusa became the unofficial regent of Japan, ruling the country on behalf of his grade school-aged grandson.
He did it.
However, this unofficialness meant that he was still, to some small extent, vulnerable to the machinations of his rivals, and he would need to cook up some kind of further scheme in order to make his position truly unassailable.
Okay.
The Otemon incident of 866
would give him
exactly this opportunity. This incident actually began as a political conflict completely unrelated to the Fujiwara themselves, being the culmination.
If someone ever writes an history of my life, I want them to write everything in terms of incident. The losing my channel incident, the starting my channel incident, the birthday incident. I won't give more context.
Of a power struggle between another powerful member of the Tomo clan, the Grand Counselor of State Tomo no Yoshio, and the current Minister of the Left, one Minamoto no Makoto. Minamoto, by the way, was one of several clan names given to extraneous members of the imperial bloodline, who were reduced from the status of royalty to the status of nobility, typically so that the court didn't need to waste money paying them the royal stipend that any prince or princess was entitled to. One particular line of descendancy from one of these Minamoto individuals would go on to become the premier bloodline of Japan's medieval samurai.
I was gonna say I've definitely heard the name Minamoto before, and I was trying to think, like, is it from the Sengoku Jidai later on? Yeah.
Topic which we will discuss more in our next video. But the aforementioned Minamoto no Makoto was not of this line. He was simply a son of the late Emperor Saga, who had been reduced to nobility and was participating in the government as a high-ranking bureaucrat. Anyway, the Otemon incident began when, in the third month of 866, someone set fire to the Daidai's Otemon Gate, a gate which served as the entrance to the Chodoin, a portion of the imperial palace complex where important ceremonies, banquets, and various affairs of government were carried out. In the immediate aftermath, Tomo no Yoshio alleged that the arson had been the work of Minamoto no Makoto, and he attempted to have his rival punished for the crime. Things initially seemed poised to work out in Yoshio's favor, but then suddenly, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa stepped in on behalf of Makoto and put the brakes on Yoshio's scheme. Shortly thereafter, a witness came forward, professing that it was in fact Yoshio's own son who had set fire to the gate, likely at the orders of his father, and this testimony was soon backed up by Yoshio's household steward, who corroborated the witness's account after being tortured. As punishment, Yoshio, his son, and a substantial number of other members of the Tomo and Ki clans were exiled off to various provinces in Japan's more remote corners, a blow from which the Tomo clan would never really recover. As a complex and nuanced mystery case that occurred nearly 1,200 years ago, the real truth of the Otemmon incident will probably forever remain lost in the sands of time. But whether Tomo no Yoshio was really guilty or not, it is clear that Fujiwara no Yoshifusa took advantage of the incident to eliminate Yoshio and advance his own power. So, what exactly did Yoshifusa have to gain from all this? For the man who was already serving as Daijo Daijin, what was the point of getting rid of these slightly lower-ranking Tomo and Ki clan aristocrats? Well, as we discussed a moment ago,
paranoia of even if they're lower ranked, they always have a chance of, scheming against you.
Yoshifusa had been acting as the de facto ruler of Japan since his grandson Seiwa's ascension to the throne. Such a position was technically referred to as Sessho, a title given to a regent acting in place of either a child or a female emperor. You may recall that this is the position that Prince Shotoku allegedly occupied when he managed Japan's affairs on behalf of his aunt, Empress Suiko, back in the Asuka period. Prince Shotoku, however, was an imperial family member, and up until this point, the office of Sessho had been defined as a position which only an individual of imperial blood could occupy. Yoshifusa wished to be officially appointed to this position, but with formidable rivals such as Tomo no Yoshio still holding significant power in the central government, he knew that such a revolutionary appointment would be difficult to bring to fruition. With the removal of Yoshio and many of his allies in the aftermath of the Otemmon incident, Yoshifusa's road to the top was finally free of obstructions. Just a few months after Yoshio's guilt in the incident was decided, Fujiwara no Yoshifusa was officially appointed Sessho by Emperor Seiwa, marking the first instance in Japanese history of a non-royal being allowed to rule the realm.
There seems to be a lot of what we've seen so far, a lot of the plot and schemes ends up in breaking down one of the rules of, bloodline. You can't do this because you're not of the right blood or something. And then, someone wants to overcome that, so they scheme and eventually get it done.
This trend would only continue with Yoshifusa's successor, his adopted son Fujiwara no Mototsune, who became the next leader of the northern Fujiwara after Yoshifusa's death. Mototsune became the next Sessho regent when Emperor Seiwa was succeeded by his young son, Emperor Yose, who was in turn Mototsune's nephew, but the relationship between the two soured as Yose grew older, and Mototsune eventually pressured the young ruler into retiring from the office of emperor. Mototsune then arranged the accession of the next sovereign, Emperor Koko, who, being 55 years of age and well outside the line of succession, was probably as surprised as anyone to find himself suddenly sitting on the imperial throne. Yeah. Emperor Koko thoroughly owed his new status to Mototsune, and so he made him his de facto regent as a show of gratitude. This differed slightly from the aforementioned Sessho position, however, as you will recall that was a post that specifically referred to regents governing in the place of women or children. Emperor Koko would pass away just 3 years later in 887, and his son and successor, the 21-year-old Emperor Uda, would finally give Fujiwara no Mototsune an official name for his position, Kanpaku. The term Kanpaku was, like so much else, based on an ancient Chinese precedent, and it designated an individual who was permitted to be involved in and to speak in regards to all things. And from here, it would designate a regent who governed on behalf of a full-grown male emperor. Along with Sessho, the position is an extremely important one in Japanese history, and if you remember anything about Mototsune, it should be that he was the person with whom the post originated. Okay. One might expect Mototsune to be grateful to Emperor Uda for this supremely honorable appointment, but this is the Fujiwara we are dealing with here, and barely a moment had lapsed before a somewhat ridiculous conflict known as the Ako incident broke out between the two. After being appointed Kampaku, Mototsune followed court tradition for such a high-level appointment by immediately resigning from the post and then awaiting a second decree from the emperor reappointing him to the position. However, in this second decree, the emperor and his Tachibana clan advisor who drew up the document chose to use the title of Ako rather than Kampaku. This too was a post derived from Chinese history, and Emperor Uda and his advisors seemed to have conceptualized it as basically being the same as Kampaku. But Mototsune, ever the know-it-all, pointed out to the emperor that in China, Ako was a title which consisted of a very high rank but no actual job duties. Mototsune chose to take offense at this and thus follow his new title to a T, completely retiring from the imperial court and refusing to govern the country at all.
What is he trying to do?
Mototsune had been the top guy in the central government for more than a decade at this point. His sudden absence caused Japan's entire government apparatus to screech to a halt, and Emperor Uda and his other advisors were forced to frantically scramble to rectify the situation. Mototsune demanded the punishment of the Tachibana advisor who had drawn up the offending decree, perhaps his ulterior motive in creating the whole commotion. And Emperor Uda seemed ready to oblige him until a high-ranking young scholar named Sugawara no Michizane stepped in to smooth over the situation. Michizane, who was at the time
This all seems like such a childish way to do political machination. I mean, yeah. Get your title, quit, to get another title, get another title, complain. Weird stuff. Yeah.
Serving as the governor of Sanuki province, authored a strongly worded letter to Mototsune, which convinced him to calm his anger and accept the emperor's apology without calling for the punishment of any parties involved. With this, the Ako incident was brought to a peaceful conclusion, but the whole affair allowed Mototsune to prove to the emperor and to his fellow politicians that he and he alone was the central core around which Japan's government revolved.
That's what he was trying to do.
While
Okay, this is the weirdest incident. I don't really know what to say about this one. I mean, was that really his intention? I don't know.
Mototsune's behavior in this incident may have succeeded in further strengthening the Fujiwara clan's authority and presence in the imperial court. It apparently left a bit of a bad taste in Emperor Uda's mouth, and when Mototsune passed away in 891, Uda chose not to appoint a new Kampaku regent in his place. Rather, he would take the reins of government himself, a style of government known in the world of Japanese history as Tenno Shinsei. Technically, several other emperors in the past had also served as the actual leaders of their respective regimes, but we see the term Tenno Shinsei used more in history books from this point on, as we now have the Fujiwara regent style of government to compare and contrast it with. The Fujiwara regent system, by the way, is referred to as Sekkan Seiji, with the word Sekkan just being a combination of the two regental titles, Sessho and Kampaku, and the word Seiji meaning politics or governing. Now, this does not mean that Emperor Uda was doing everything completely solo, and indeed his two main advisors during his regime were Mototsune's son, Fujiwara no Tokihira, and the aforementioned hero of the Ako incident, Sugawara no Michizane. Uda appointed Michizane head of the Chamberlain's office, and in general relied on him as his closest confidant. In 894, Emperor Uda decided that it was high time that another Kentoshi embassy be sent to Tang, China. It had been 56 years since the last one, and he settled on his right-hand man Michizane to lead the endeavor. It is thought that this selection of Michizane was prompted by the persuasion of a jealous Fujiwara no Tokihira, who knew that if Michizane was chosen to lead the embassy, he would end up being absent from the imperial court for several years, or even permanently if the embassy were to meet with a disaster at sea, as was so common with the Kentoshi voyages. Michizane was no fool, however, and he responded to the situation not by protesting his own appointment, but rather by suggesting that the entire idea of sending an embassy at all was a mistake. Ever the well-informed academic, Michizane argued to the emperor that Tang China was in a state of political instability, and that
I was wondering, like, at which point would they stop modeling themselves only after China and start to have that, that view that most countries get eventually of, we have to make our own culture and our own decision, right? I'm actually surprised that so far it lasted this long, just the embassy to come back with a lot of knowledge of how China operates and try to replicate it. And I guess maybe this is the time, yeah?
not only would sending an embassy be unnecessarily risky, but that there was no longer even anything to learn from the Tang Chinese. He was not really bluffing here, by the way, as the Tang dynasty did indeed collapse just 13 years later in 907. Anyway, the emperor accepted the opinion of his favorite advisor, and in that year...
I mean, doesn't mean there was nothing to learn, right? So, maybe you learn how to not collapse your own dynasty.
894, the practice of sending Kentoshi embassies to Tang China was permanently abolished.
Okay.
While this abolition would have the immediate effect of saving Sugawara no Michizane's political skin, it would also have significant long-term ramifications in that it led to the decline of Chinese cultural influence on Japan and the rise of a truly unique Japanese culture which includes many of the cultural elements still associated with the country today.
Which, beyond that statement, I wonder if it was a good thing, right? Like, obviously, it really helps the country a lot for a couple hundred years. All the embassy coming back with a ton of knowledge on government, maybe, science, infrastructure, building, etc., right? Like, a lot of the, there's no doubt that, like, for a country as young as Japan was, going to a massive country like China with so much, knowledge to be taken was a big boost, right? And it led to a lot of, great progress and good decisions for Japan. And you could say that at this point they're established, so it's time for them to make their own decision. But, in an alternative history kind of way, I wonder, like, if they had continued the embassy and then to use the knowledge from the embassy to model Japan after it, would it have led to more peace and prosperity? Because obviously we know that a lot of war and upheaval is coming up. As Japan becomes much more self-cultured, you know what I mean? It's an interesting thought, yeah. I'm usually not that into alternative story stuff, but makes you think a bit. I mean, I guess, I could probably answer my own question if I knew more about what's coming up with China at this point. Like, do they themselves fall into dark age of non-stop conflict, and so there's, like, less to learn because, they're always fighting and destroying and all that? Or do they get more prosperity eventually?
The political world of Heian Japan was an ever-turbulent one, and while Michizane had bought himself some temporary safety, his rivals, particularly Fujiwara no Tokihira, had hardly given up on attempting to knock him down a few pegs. In 897, despite being only 31 years of age, Emperor Uda retired from the emperorship and passed on the throne to his 12-year-old son, who took the regnal name of Emperor Daigo.
He really wanted to get it out of
Uda's intent here was almost certainly to continue ruling from behind the scenes, a trend that we will see really become set in stone in the next couple of centuries. However, it is important to note that this was not yet an established practice, and Uda by no means had total control over his son's regime, a fact which will become very important in a moment. Under the regime of Emperor Daigo, Sugawara no Michizane and Fujiwara no Tokihira maintained their places at the summit of the imperial bureaucracy, serving respectively in the positions of Minister of the Right and Minister of the Left. Michizane, however, continued to be a target of jealousy from his peers due to all the preferential treatment he had received from ex-Emperor Uda, and in 901, Tokihira managed to convince the new Emperor Daigo that Michizane was plotting against him. Daigo, now 16, likely saw Michizane as a tool for his retired father Uda to continue meddling in the affairs of government, and thus was probably all too eager to gain a pretext to expel him from the court. The retired Uda is said to have rushed to aid his old friend when he heard the news, but was barred from entering the imperial palace by the palace guards.
Really?
Again, this was not yet the age when retired emperors could rule the court with an iron fist. Sugawara no Michizane was exiled.
But to the point of like the palace guard stopping him.
To the Dazaifu in Kyushu. Technically, he was transferred there to serve as the Dazai Gon no Sochi, the number 2 in charge of the Dazaifu. But for all intents and purposes, he had been exiled. This incident, by the way, is known as the Shotai incident, or the Shotai no Hen. Michizane would die of disease just 2 years later, in 903, and shortly thereafter, a number of sudden deaths within the imperial family and the Fujiwara clan, as well as a case of lightning striking the imperial palace, led many of his contemporaries to believe that he had returned from the grave as an angry spirit to curse those who had wronged him. However, as the years and centuries went by, Michizane evolved to become revered as the god of academics, and he is enshrined as such in the numerous Tenmangu shrines throughout Japan, where students studying for entrance exams and such continue to pray to him even today.
Why does he end up linked to like the god of academics like this? From everything we've learned, I mean, I'm sure he wasn't stupid, right? But what is the link?
In all, he is a figure very popular in Japanese folklore and literature, and of all the characters who we have seen in this video thus far, he is probably one of, if not the most common subjects of visual representation in Japanese artwork throughout the centuries.
Okay.
Despite the successful removal of Sugawara no Michizane, Fujiwara no Tokihira would never end up being elevated to the status of regent, as the young Emperor Daigo, like his father Uda before him, opted to pursue the Tenno Shinsei style of government and rule Japan himself. Emperor Daigo's regime is remembered to history as the Engi no Chi, with Engi being the name of the era comprising the majority of Daigo's reign. This regime would go on to be celebrated and even pedestalized by later generations as a shining example of Japan's imperial government in its most ideal form, with a strong emperor ruling at its center and great efforts being made to repair and revitalize the ever-crumbling Ritsuryo system of governance. If you've been watching this series for any length of time, you've probably noticed the trend that someone always seems to be working hard to fix the Ritsuryo system. And looking back in hindsight, it seems that perhaps it was always doomed to fail from the start. Even with Emperor Kammu's policy reforms at the dawn of the Heian period.
I mean, it does seem like, they're kind of stuck in the reviving the old system rather than thinking of maybe just changing it if you have better ideas, right? And I understand that's not easy, right? It's already been going on for a long time, so yeah, but if the system is failing so bad, maybe you need an emperor that's actually willing to say, yeah, it's not working, let's change things.
The system had continued to deteriorate, and Emperor Daigo would make a last-ditch effort to save it from its inevitable doom. He issued the Engi no Shoen Seirire, an order consolidating Japan's various privately held shoen estates, which also included instructions to once again carry out a reallotment of the country's rice fields to its peasant cultivators. This would end up being the final such redistribution, and most Japanese history books seem to be in agreement that, following the reigns of Emperor Daigo and his son Emperor Murakami, the Ritsuryo system finally collapsed for good. It would continue to exist in name for many more centuries as Japan's on-paper system of government, but in practice it had fundamentally ceased to function. From here on, Japan's tax system would come to be based on its land rather than its people, and affairs in the provinces would come to be almost completely entrusted to the various provinces' kokushi, or provincial governors, with very little meddling from either their superiors in the imperial court or the district managers serving under them. This will come to be an important point in explaining the emergence of the samurai, and we will explore it in further depth in our next episode. The next few generations would see some slight ebb and flow in the power of the Fujiwara clan, as they struggled, sometimes successfully and sometimes not, to maintain their grip on Japan's regency. Emperor Daigo's immediate successor, Emperor Suzaku, would appoint a Fujiwara, Tokihira's younger brother Fujiwara no Tadahira, to be his regent. But Emperor Suzaku's successor, the aforementioned Emperor Murakami, quickly pivoted back to the Tenno Shinsei system of emperor-centric government. Following Emperor Murakami's death, the next emperor, Emperor Reizei, once again appointed a Fujiwara to serve as his regent, but some resistance to this practice still remained in the court. One Minamoto no Takaakira, son of the late Emperor Daigo and another non-warrior recipient of the Minamoto name, made a bid at supplanting the Fujiwara as the main power behind the throne. His son-in-law was an imperial prince and one of the main candidates to become the weak and sickly Emperor Reizei's crown prince and successor. And as we saw with the Fujiwara, becoming an emperor's father-in-law was about the surest path to power that one could hope for in ancient Japan. However, before Takaakira could see his ambitions realized, he found himself suddenly accused of plotting rebellion against Emperor Reizei, and he was exiled off to Kyushu in an episode remembered as the Anna incident or the Anna no Hen. The accusation levied against him was likely the product of more Machiavellian scheming by the Fujiwara, and following the Anna incident, the regent positions of Sessho and Kampaku became permanent posts in the imperial court, which, with the exception of a brief blip at the end of
I show a picture of someone, Konoe branch, Fujiwara Kampaku region.
The 16th century would go on to be monopolized by the Fujiwara for the next 900 years. With their securement of the top spot in Japan's political world, the Fujiwara found themselves mostly free of external threats. Instead, the next wave of instability would come from within, as the Northern House began to tear itself apart with internal rivalry. Various contenders within the family vied to be next in line to become the Uji no Choja, the patriarch and leader of the clan, and brothers fought brothers in the struggle to reach this summit of power. When the dust had settled in the early 11th century, the one finally left as the undisputed leader of the Fujiwara clan was a man named Fujiwara no Michinaga. And if there were a contest for the Fujiwara family member most well known to the average person today, this is the guy you'd probably want to put your money on. Throughout his lifetime, Michinaga would manage to have 4 of his daughters married to 4 different emperors and spend roughly 30 years ruling Japan from behind the scenes as either the father-in-law or the paternal grandfather of multiple emperors. Before you have to ask, yes, this produced an extremely inbred family situation, with 2 of Michinaga's daughters marrying their own nephews in order to become empress consorts. But as we have seen before,
is nephew that bad in terms of like the actual inbreeding factor, whatever it's called, right? I forget. I don't actually know enough about that, but I think nephew is obviously like not the worst in terms of like the potential result, or like the percentage is low for like, you know, deformities and conditions.
This was hardly uncommon in ancient Japan's aristocracy.
Like it's still not the Habsburg or something.
Nor that of many other countries for that matter. At the celebration for his 3rd daughter's wedding, Michinaga had his own personal Scarface moment when he famously read his full moon poem, known in Japanese as Mochizuki no Uta, triumphantly proclaiming, "Kono you wa waga yo to zo omou mochizuki no kaketaru koto mo nashi to omoeba." No waning in the glory of the full moon. This world is indeed my world. The poem is extremely famous in Japan as a symbol.
This was the moment to insert the Tony Montana meme, though. Like, this was the moment to put in the clip, to compare it to.
Of the Fujiwara clan's power at their apex, though some interpret a hint of melancholy in it, as Michinaga was struggling with illness at the time that he recited it, and was perhaps hinting that his glory, just like the fullness of the moon in the sky, was inevitably a transient thing.
Like anybody,
Michinaga would be succeeded as the Uji no Choja of the northern Fujiwara by his eldest son, Fujiwara no Yorimichi, who would serve as regent and de facto ruler of Japan for a stunning span of 50 years. Yorimichi also married his daughters to emperors, but the unions failed to produce any heirs, and so while the era of Yorimichi and his father Michinaga is regarded by most historians as the apex of the northern Fujiwara's power, the clan's authority began to experience experience a gradual decline in the following generations. During the time of Yorimichi and Michinaga, roughly 3/4 of the imperial court's kugyo, the absolute highest ranking level of aristocrats, who typically held the top positions in the central government, were made up of Fujiwara clan members. In contrast, less than half of the kugyo were made up of Fujiwara during the time of Yoshifusa and Mototsune back in the late 800s, and this number would dip below half again by the beginning of the 1100s. As we discussed earlier, Chinese influence on Japanese culture began to wane after the abolition of the Kentoshi embassies in 894, and the unique culture that blossomed afterwards is referred to as Kokufu Bunka, or Kokufu culture. The word Kokufu literally just means in the style of our country, and it typically denotes the culture of the 10th and 11th centuries. In other words, the culture that flourished during the time of the Fujiwara clan's Sekkan Seiji style of government. This period saw the rise of the unique Japanese style of visual artwork known as Yamato-e, a style of painting utilizing soft lines and vivid colors to depict natural landscapes or Japanese lifestyle and customs. Yamato-e is most famously represented in Heian period emaki, aka picture scrolls, which also began to be created starting in this period. One of the most renowned examples of such is the Genji Monogatari emaki, the picture scroll illustrating Murasaki Shikibu's The Tale of Genji. This leads us nicely into another key cultural development under the umbrella of Kokufu Bunka, the birth of uniquely Japanese styles of writing and literature. Prior to the mid-Heian period, the Japanese language, when put into written form, was expressed entirely through Chinese kanji characters, which were assigned to the various syllabic sounds of Japanese. The star pupils among you will recall that we discussed this writing style, called Mangyo-gana, a few episodes ago. During the golden age of the Fujiwara, the Chinese characters used in Mangyo-gana were broken down and simplified for ease of writing into an almost cursive-like style, and this simplification led to the birth of two of the Japanese
I mean, some of them do look familiar. I see like K, K, O maybe? One of those might be U. U. It's kind of hard with the font, the handwriting.
Alphabets that are still used to this very day, hiragana and katakana. The former, hiragana, was primarily developed and used by court women who employed it in letter writing or the exchange of poems. It is no coincidence that some of the most renowned writers of this period are also women, with the two foremost examples.
Kind of wish again, I'll say it all the time, and I'm a broken record, but I wish, Kanji had died, and it just stuck with hiragana and katakana. I mean, even though right now, I don't even remember, I remember maybe 1/3 of hiragana and katakana, as I've tried to learn before, and I could definitely remember all of them and learn hiragana and katakana. Anytime I know that the fact is, that in most writing there's still so many kanji, and that I have no motivation or belief that I could actually remember kanji, it just kills me, right? I just wish that, hiragana and katakana had fully taken over and they had totally moved away from the madness of kanji.
Being the aforementioned Murasaki Shikibu and her contemporary Seisho Nagon. During this era, high-ranking aristocrats, mostly various members of the Fujiwara clan, were working vigorously to get their daughters married to the emperor, whether as his consort or as one of his lesser wives.
They have to write to him.
When such a union occurred, the new imperial wife would move into the imperial palace, to an area called the Kokyu, and she would be accompanied by numerous ladies-in-waiting from lower-ranking aristocratic families. This created an environment.
This is still very similar to the concubine system of China, which again, I know it from Apothecary Diaries, right? Kusuria. I don't know how perfectly accurate it is, but yeah, it is still very much that system, right?
Environment in which a large number of cultured and educated women were coexisting in close proximity to one another, and the result was a boom in literary culture. Murasaki Shikibu and Seisho Nagon were both ladies-in-waiting to two different wives of Emperor Ichijo around the turn of the 11th century. Their mistresses were both members of the Fujiwara clan, albeit from rival lines, and Shikibu and Shonagon were likewise drawn into this rivalry. Sei Shonagon was a woman well-versed in both the Japanese and Chinese classics, and her masterpiece, the Makura no Soshi, aka the Pillow Book, was a collection of essays detailing things such as the changing of the seasons or the day-to-day happenings in the imperial court. Murasaki Shikibu was also well-educated in classical Chinese literature, although she seems to have been a shyer person than Sei Shonagon, whom she criticized in her diary as being a frivolous show-off. Murasaki Shikibu authored the extremely famous Tale of Genji, or Genji Monogatari, a long-form novel depicting the romantic adventures and life story of its main character, an idealized aristocrat named Hikaru Genji. The work, which took Shikibu more than 10 years to complete, is often referred to as the world's first novel, and together with the aforementioned Makura no Soshi, it is still studied by Japanese school children today. In addition...
Is there any anime based on the Genji Monogatari? There might have been. Let's see. Yeah, seems like there is. That's maybe why I've heard of it then. That's maybe why. There must be like multiple adaptation, right? Yeah. There's this one. It's a movie from '87 by TVSI. I make Monogatari, that's different. Wait, I saw... yeah, there's this as well. There's a TV Genji Monogatari from 2009 with 11 episodes. Does not seem too badly rated. Yeah. Maybe I should watch this one. Oh wait, Sugita is playing a character. Tono Shujo. Yeah. I might watch an adaptation of it to get the story. That could be cool. Yeah. Maybe I could do reaction, who knows. Yeah, I think there's a different adaptation. Yeah. I'm sure there's live action as well. Tell me what I should check out.
There were a multitude of other women who excelled in the literary field around this time, and many of them expressed themselves through the diary format, known as Nikki in Japanese. Now, there are several different types of diaries that remain to us from the Heian period, including those written simply for recording one's daily job duties or events. But the literary category...
Simply, but that's interesting, right? To, as far as like the greatest story is great, but what I really enjoy, again, this type of videos that we're watching right now, and again, we're going to continue for the period until, maybe like 1920s maybe. I'm definitely looking forward to when we can go into much more specific stories, like sometimes I really enjoy a story for the more like individual stories of people, and maybe not like, the emperor or the king, sometimes just like the more normal people with normal life and what the lifestyle of the time was like. I'm kind of interested in that.
Of diaries was written from the start with the intention of having the final product read and enjoyed by others. Some of the most famous of these include the Kagero Nikki, written by a Fujiwara woman known to us only as Fujiwara no Michitsuna's mother, and the Sarashina Nikki, which was written by Sugawara no Michizane's fifth-generation granddaughter, another woman whose real name is lost to history. Interestingly, however, one of the pioneering works in this literary diary category, and the one that may have provided the spark for the ones that followed, was written by a man, the aristocrat Kino Tsurayuki. Tsurayuki served a term as the governor of Tosa province in the early 930s, and he wrote his seminal work called the Tosa Nikki, or the Tosa Diary, as an account of his 55-day return journey from Tosa back to Heian-kyo at the end of his term. The unique thing about the Tosa Diary, however, is that Tsurayuki wrote the entire thing from the perspective of a woman, and penned it in hiragana rather than with the more masculine Chinese characters that men of the time were expected to use. By assuming a female persona, Tsurayuki was able to effectively free himself from the typical writing conventions of his era. In addition to the Tosa Diary, Tsurayuki was also responsible for compiling another monumental work of Heian literature, the Kokin Wakashu. This was a compilation of waka poetry written by several emperors and various nobles of the Heian court, and it was the first of its kind to be put together at the order of a sitting emperor, Emperor Daigo. Waka literally means Japanese poetry, and the word itself exists as a sort of antonym to kanshi, which is the word for tradition.
Basically, young master, right? In what's that anime? The Elusive Samurai. And many other anime, right? What is like a young prince, they call him Waka.
Traditional Chinese style poetry. Prior to the era of Japanese history which we have focused on in this episode, kanshi was placed on a much higher pedestal than the native waka, which was seen as little more than an amusing pastime. Around the time of Emperor Uda and Emperor Daigo, this balance began to majorly shift. One's ability to skillfully compose waka poetry started to be seen as a measure of one's caliber as an aristocrat and a member of the imperial court.
You have to become an artist.
The Kokin Wakashu was not only compiled by imperial order, but also contained numerous poems by particularly close confidants of Uda and Daigo, is a clear indicator of this change. Beyond the world of painting and literature, Kokufu culture is also characterized by its defining developments in the architectural sphere. In particular, this was the era that birthed Shinden Zukuri, the style of architecture in which the homes of powerful Heian aristocrats were built. These homes were sprawling yashiki residences, in which several different buildings were connected by columned corridors and looked out over a wide and lavish garden landscape. The main building of this residence, from which the architectural style derives its name, was known as the Shinden, literally sleeping building in Japanese, and it was here where the master of the house would sleep and hold banquets and events and such. To the north, east, and/or west of the Shinden would be ancillary buildings called Tainoya, in which the master of the house's family members would reside, and these would be connected to the Shinden by hallways known as Wataridono, which were sometimes completely unwalled. To the south of the Shinden would be a wide and expansive garden where anything from ceremonies to the playing of casual sports like...
When I think of this, I think of Isao Takahata's movie, The Tale of Princess Kaguya, and eventually Kaguya goes to one of those kind of places, I guess, and it is very... even to this painting, it looks very much like this, the kind of construction style of the place.
Kemari would take place, and in its center would be a large pond dotted with man-made islands connected by arching footbridges. A single Wataridono hallway typically extended down into the heart of this garden to a wall-less building called the Tsuridono, which faced out onto the garden's pond and provided a spot in which one could relax and enjoy the weather and the view. Judging from the beautiful artwork and lavish residences in which the aristocrats of the imperial court resided, one might almost think that the Heian period was a time of great optimism and lust for life. But this was not exactly the case. Japan has always been a country more susceptible than most to natural disaster, and Heian Japan was no exception, being ceaselessly ravaged by everything from earthquakes and volcanoes.
Actually, beyond plague, he hasn't really talked too much about natural disaster so far. Though I'm sure there's been, and maybe they weren't recorded, but there's been some major one at this point already, I assume.
Volcanic eruptions, to typhoons and droughts, to famine and plague.
It's talked about the plague, yeah, fair enough. Which I guess is a natural disaster. Yeah.
People of Heian Japan were very strongly aware of the fragility and transience of their own lives, and the anxiety resulting from this brought about the popularity from the mid-900s onward of an idea known as Mappo Shiso, end times thought. According to ancient Buddhist tradition, the world would pass through several eras following the death of Gautama Buddha, and the last of these was called Mappo, and it would be the era in which the world would descend into chaos and enlightenment would become impossible. Basically, it was the end times, although it didn't so much predict the end of the world as it did an impossibly long age of darkness and despair. Well, according to one ancient theory, this Mappo era would begin in the year 1052, and given the prevalence of death and natural disaster in Heian Japan, this theory built up a lot of steam, as it seemed to explain why life was so horrible for so many people. Thus, much like what happened in Europe in the Middle Ages, the people of ancient Japan began to look forward to the next life for peace and salvation, hoping that after death they would be reborn in what is basically the Buddhist equivalent of heaven, another world called Gokuraku Jodo, aka the Pure Land. The Pure Land was said to be a paradise completely free of pain and suffering, and it was the realm of the celestial Buddha Amitabha, known as Amida-butsu in Japanese. The Amida-do, or Hall of Amitabha, a hall of worship inside which a statue of Amitabha would be enshrined, became a common fixture of temple complexes in this era, and Fujiwara no Michinaga is even said to have had his deathbed moved into one of these halls so that he could gaze upon the image of Amitabha as he drew his final breaths. Michinaga's son, Yorimichi, the 50-year regent who we discussed a bit earlier in the video, created one of the most extravagant expressions of the new belief system with his construction of the Byodo-in Ho-do, known in English as the Byodo-in Phoenix Hall, on the grounds of what had been his vacation villa in 1053. The fact that 1053 is exactly 1 year after the year when the Heian Japanese believed that the world had entered into the end times is no coincidence, by the way.
I guess so, yeah.
The Phoenix Hall is itself an Amida-do, or a hall of Amitabha, and it was built to be an expression of the appearance of the Pure Land, a literal heaven on earth, in other words. It is one of very few buildings from the Fujiwara age to have survived to the present day, and its depiction on the back of the modern 10-yen coin should give you an indication of just how well known and important it continues to be in Japan today.
So, this Dark Age, was it only here, or was there like other time in history when things were bad where it was also called like the same thing, like an end of time age? Like Sengoku Jidai and stuff like that? Or was it only here?
In addition to the construction of the iconic Phoenix Hall, the 1050s were also the decade which witnessed the outbreak of a conflict which would prove to be hugely influential in the history of the samurai, the former 9 Years' War. This, as well as its sequel conflict.
Oh, it does have a video about that as well, like a separate video. I didn't realize it was around here, okay.
If you will, the later 3 Years' War, are two incidents which I'm really looking forward to covering in our next episode, when we take a look at developments out in the provinces during the mid-Heian period. We will of course also be looking at some of the earlier proto-samurai conflicts, such as the rebellions of Taira no Masakado and Fujiwara no Sumitomo.
Okay, so that's next. Huh? Okay, actually, what we might do, because yeah, next episode is 40 minutes, right? So I don't know, because yes, it does have like a separate video for the Genpei War, and then the former 9 and later 3 Years War, both way longer videos, right? So I think, so next is supposed to be the former 9-year war, right? Where is it? Heian. It's not listed here for some reason. And then a Genpei War, yeah. Okay. So what I might do is try to, I mean, good things the yes chapter, so we'll be able to skip what we've already seen, but yeah. I guess next time we might watch those two videos, well, as part of the main thing, yeah, maybe, yeah. I'll try to fit it in. Actually, we're going to stop at this one. I was planning to like watch all of the AI in one go, but after 3 hours of learning, I feel like, you know, that was a good amount. And as you guys know, I don't like to continue a stream longer than I feel like, you know, when I feel like I'm starting to zone out a little bit. We've learned a ton. It was very interesting. But yeah, we'll continue next time. And again, I'll try to see where to place those two videos. I mean, it shouldn't be too hard, hopefully. It is from this channel, so maybe it will flow not too badly. But yeah, really interesting stuff. Really, really interesting stuff. You know, I think today was the most interesting in terms of how detailed the stuff we cover was, from art, all the political machination, the state of the common people, the laws. There was really a lot of good stuff. Again, the farther we advance, the more history there is. I mean, as they said, there was even the first novel in human history, I guess. I mean, there might have been some older ones that were lost, right? But yeah, just really fascinating periods, right here. You know, Nara was pretty good, but Heian is really, really, really cooking right now. And I guess, yeah, with what's coming next time, we're getting into even deeper stuff. And yeah, I think I'll do the next stream within a few days. Again, I'm really like focusing on this right now. Maybe it's Thursday, we'll see. Yeah. Maybe I'll actually do 2 more streams of this week. I don't know. Again, I know this isn't really popular, like I won't get much viewers, but yeah. I could learn all of this by my own, but I do have the terrible habit of when I watch history videos by my own, I'm not just sitting here watching it. I have it on the second screen while I'm playing a game or something, and then I retain a lot less information, right? In a weird way, these streams are like a good way for me to focus, because I can't be just playing a game while streaming and watching this video, right? So yeah, it helps me actually focus more and retain the information, I guess. So yeah, really good stuff. Again, this channel is killing it. Beyond than Japanese history. Really great stuff, and cannot wait for next time. Hope you guys enjoyed today's reaction. Like, subscribe, comment, and I'll see you guys next time, or tomorrow if you want. I'm doing some Conan reaction. Like, subscribe, comment. See you. ExoticBankai.